This is the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast. We made it to the Super Bowl. Bigger than what? Bigger than what? This is the Super Bowl Picks edition of the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander. I'm joined as always by my guy, Mr. Matt Russell. We are here. The big week is here. Lots to break down. The big game is going on. Obviously, I'm conflicted if you follow this pod and know what I like to bet on, because it's the Chiefs and it's my Niners. I love betting on the Chiefs. The Niners are my squad. So this will get very interesting, kids. But, you know, it's been a while. We've had a week off. You know, we had some time to digest what happened in conference championship weekend in both the AFC and NFC, both doozies, might I say. NFL stays winning. But Matt, how are you doing? Before we dive in to the Super Bowl festivities, how are you doing, my dude?
I'm good, man. I can't wait to find out which side you're going to take here in this game, because it's one thing when it's like your team's in the Super Bowl, but it's another when it's not that your team is like in the Super Bowl and they're like underdogs to Kansas City. It's like you get an opportunity here to take Patrick Mahomes and the points. Like, oh, Patrick Mahomes and the points. Like that, that might be more your team than the 49ers in and of themselves, right? So I can't wait to find out what you're going to do there. I'm good. Super Bowl week is just the absolute worst. Everybody just congregates in the Super Bowl location and then they leave, and you're just sort of like, why was everybody down there? And the answer is, of course, to just kind of like
flex.
I was going to say pat each other on the back, and that is the sort of non-graphic way to put it. And that's coming off of an NHL All-Star game in Toronto, which is the all-time pat on the back, let's say, scenario. So it's just 2 weeks basically since we've had anything decent from a sporting perspective, and in between we have to deal with this I'm not going to use the word. I'm not going to do it.
Listen, all I'm going to say is
don't get fired situation. And so I just can't wait for this game. Not even the game, like just get me to like Saturday where I have to stop hearing about just all kinds of nonsense and BS with people who are just, clout chasing at this point out in Las Vegas.
Too many Taylor Swift takes. Like, it's not that serious. Do you know what I mean? Like whatever.
Sure.
Like, there's just a lot going on. Yeah. And listen, I'm here for it. I've heard about Travis Kelce supposedly inventing the fade haircut. There's like a lot going on here.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I'm hyped up for the exact reason that you mentioned as well. Right. A lot going on, but two of my teams that I like backing throughout the year for different reasons are now meeting in the Super Bowl. In terms of last week, 1-1 record, bringing the season total to 142, 135, and 7, splitting last week or the last week of games in terms of, what we're talking about with the Ravens hosting the Chiefs and the Niners hosting the Lions. Crazy games there, but it all sets up this week. And here's the interesting part of all this to me, because we got the Niners and the Chiefs, a 2-point spread. And I'm going to be honest, right? I was prepared to come in here, do a little bit of a bit, come on here and talk about all year. I talk about you can't bet against the Chiefs and Mahomes getting points, and you got to do that. But it's my Niners, and of course I can't bet against my Niners. I can't enjoy the Super Bowl and bet against my team. I can't do that. So I'm not going to give you a pick. I'm just going to sit here and bet props and do all that fun stuff. Can't really take a side.
BS.
But I'm going to be honest with you, Matt. I'm going to be honest with you. Okay. This is not a bit. I am genuinely on the San Francisco 49ers.
Whoa.
And this is not bit. This is like real. And it's funny because anybody that I've told this to so far are accusing me of doing a bit just because it's my team. And I think that there are too many other factors going the other way. The first of which I know you will love to talk about, is if everyone and their moms is saying the Chiefs, you can't bet against Patrick Mahomes. Why is it still 2? Why are their Niners so Still favored by 2. Is Vegas just deciding we're just going to give away all this money to all these people betting on Patrick Mahomes as an underdog? We'll start there.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start there. But to me, as a Niners watcher, I think this game really comes down to offense. And I think that even though last week I was on the Chiefs, betting on the institution of the Chiefs in terms of what they're going to do against Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. I think you at the same time are also people who are realists. And even though I was on the Chiefs, I can sit here and say, I have no idea why Baltimore didn't run the ball.
Right. Biggest mystery, man. Biggest mystery. Yeah.
Most obvious thing ever. And I can say I was on the Chiefs and still, hey, cool, won money, but like, I don't know what Baltimore did. So now we come into this game. And I think Shanahan has tape available of what happened to Baltimore in that game. I think Shanahan also knows that he has Christian McCaffrey, who basically scored a touchdown in every single game this season. Your job was to get him healthy to the Super Bowl and through a playoff run. Your job was to get Debo there as well. Let those dudes cook. Pound the rock. I know you remember the wise words of my high school football coach, straight up the gut, nothing fancy about it, Mr. Go.
Yes.
The ball.
He hasn't been on the show in a while.
Keep Mahomes on the sideline, control the clock, control the ball. All the talk is Brock Purdy. Can Brock Purdy come back again against the Chiefs? Blah, blah. Nobody's talking about, can the Chiefs come back if they're down? Nobody's bringing that up. Why is that? Either way, I'm saying there are more than valid football reasons as to why the Niners are favored in this game. And I feel like a lot of people are just overriding that and just completely discounting that as if like, oh, well, the Chiefs won the AFC, so that means they got to win the Super Bowl. Like the comparisons to Brady are great, but it's not like Brady won every Super Bowl either. So I'm just here to say I'm on the Niners. Pound the rock. We will talk about Super Bowl MVP, I'm sure, at some point, and I'll give you my lean there for sure. But it's Niners -2. I just think the Niners offense is lethal. They put up points against everybody not named the Baltimore Ravens, and the Chiefs are not named the Baltimore Ravens. I love my guy Spags, but we've been here before. This Super Bowl is a rematch from not that long ago. Spags was around there too. And if Jimmy Garoppolo could make one pass, the Niners win that game. There's a lot there. I know. I'm still touched by that, but I've ranted for too long. I'm sorry. I apologize. Matt, Niners -2. What say you, my friend?
Yeah. So I actually want to talk about that Super Bowl 54 because I actually rewatched that yesterday. So I've got some very fresh takes on that game. Not that it necessarily informs this game all that much per se,
sure,
but it is, something worth at least kind of touching on. But first, obviously, we got to talk about the line, right? And you asked about, the line and why, how can 49ers still be favored if everybody's so all about the Chiefs, et cetera, right? So the first thing, that we have to talk about here is, from a market perspective, because this is a market, this is betting, right? This is buying low and selling high and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so probably shouldn't come as a surprise to you that like a bet on the 49ers is probably a buy low situation, right? Because of where the Chiefs are in the sort of public perception domain, right? And, over at The Score, I write a Monday column, or is it Monday or Tuesday? It's been a while. But for the first 14 weeks essentially of the season, talking about where the betting markets rate these teams. Because as you know, right, everybody, all these different media outlets put out their power ratings, and the power ratings are nonsense, right? They're just largely like the standings, just regurgitated into a power rating. Whereas actual power ratings from a betting perspective inform the betting line. We talk about it all the time, right? The 0 to 100 scale and sort of what that means and tracking sort of, again, how people perceive these teams. And so, outside of the basically first game of the season where you'll remember the 49ers went on the road to Pittsburgh and they were a 1-point favorite in Pittsburgh, which looking back, 18 weeks of regular season, 22 weeks ago, seems like it might as well have been a billion years ago, right? Because of course the 49ers would be drastically higher of a favorite than they were in week one. So basically since then, where the 49ers came out and just absolutely walloped the Steelers, and everybody went, oh, okay, like the 49ers are back, like Brock Purdy looks fine. Because remember, we had some concern, obviously, of stemming off the arm injury, et cetera, et cetera. So, as you track it throughout the season, especially the way the Chiefs kind of dipped at the halfway point and through the back half of the season, the highest point would probably have been on a neutral field, 49ers minus 4.5. And if you go, man, like that sounds crazy, like there's no way it would be that high. Think about it this way. They were 6-point favorites to the Baltimore Ravens at home. And so if you take off, we talk about like about 1.5, 1.75 is home field advantage. If you take off of that, then you're talking about that week, Baltimore would have been about a 4.5-point underdog on a neutral field. And by the way, Kansas City, for a very long time have not been to the level of Baltimore. And if they were, they would have been under a field goal underdog last week instead of over a field goal underdog, right? So You can see sort of just in using those three teams and kind of extrapolating it all out, that it goes like 49ers, Ravens from a rating perspective, Chiefs from a rating perspective. And so essentially going into last week, I mean, think about it this way, right? You're 3.5 on the road to Baltimore. What would they have been on a neutral to San Francisco, right? It's probably around the same number because the 49ers are rated a little bit higher, but you take off home field advantage, you probably have around 3.5. So at the high point, it was probably 4.5. Even going into we're going to keep saying last week, deal with it, people. It was essentially the last week of our real lives since the last, this week is just absolutely nonsense. Last week, they would have been about a 3.5-point favor. And even the look ahead line sort of suggested 3. And you can sort of understand why that would be, because if Kansas City beat Baltimore, which of course they inevitably did, you could already predict that there would be interest in Kansas City going into that next game, because we'd all be talking about the things that we're talking about now, which is Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs are back and like this, that, or whatever. And so it goes from 4.5 at its peak to 3.5 before last week. But you could see why, if they made it through last week, they would get down to 3. At no point was 2 in the conversation, right? From a point spread perspective. And so this 2 is based off of literally just last week. And the literally just last week, it's funny how like when we get down to these singular games, whether it's, a Monday night game, a Thursday night game, or especially in the playoffs, or you're watching these games, everybody's got their eyes on the same game. The first impressionism of these games, where it's like, what's gone on in the first half, really in a lot of ways frames how people think the game, how to evaluate the teams. And it doesn't almost matter who won the game or what had to happen for a team to win that game, right? Because we'll talk a little bit more about the 49ers here in a second, but just worth sort of mentioning, right? The 49ers, you're watching that game, and of course, over the first, essentially hour and a half of life, of real time, we're watching that game going like, oh man, like the defense is terrible. Like they're giving up 3rd and longs left, right, and center. The offense isn't clicking against a Lions defense that was, perceived to be really bad. And it's just like, man, oh, this is brutal. But like the thing with a good team, a great team, a top team, arguably the top team in the league, the thing that you're worried about when you're betting against them or when you're facing them as a fan is that like no matter what happens, they're never dead, right? It's always like, it's like a basketball team, right? It's like the 1 seed going against the 9 seed in the second round of the NCAA tournament. That 9 seed can take a 15-point lead, but it's like no one's celebrating a victory because it's like, yeah, man, the 1 seed could just kind of get on this run here and it's going to be a problem. And that's what the 49ers did. And it's like, it's a mini, or there was a mini version of that the week before against Green Bay, where it was like, when they needed to get it done, they got it done. And listen, we were on Green Bay from a points perspective the week before, and we were on the Lions from a points perspective last week. And the point is like, yeah, the 49ers are overvalued from asking a team to win by a margin, right? Like by a significant margin. But I don't know, and it's honestly, it's like the Chiefs have been for the last like 4 years, where they weren't covering point spreads, but they were constantly winning games, because it's like the money line makes sense because they're going to be a minus 300, minus 350 money line against these teams that they're 8-point favorites of, because they are a 75 to 80% probability of winning, no matter kind of how the game goes up until that point. But actually covering the point spread is probably less than a 50% proposition. So from the 49ers perspective, it's like, no, I still don't want to take them to win by 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever points.
Mhm.
But that's not what we're asking of them, right? I don't even really want them to win by over 3.5 because if the line is 3.5, I'm probably on Kansas City this week.
Mhm.
But the line is down to 2 at this point.
Before we continue, I got a couple questions for you. Are you tired of cooking, cleaning, and shopping for groceries every week? Do you wish you had more time to enjoy the Super Bowl with your friends and family? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you need Factor. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service, delivers fresh, chef-prepared meals right to my door so I can enjoy delicious food without spending hours in the kitchen. Factor meals are ready to eat in as little as 2 minutes. Factor delivers chef-crafted meals right to my door so I don't have to waste time shopping, cooking, or cleaning, which means more time for picks. No more wasting time in the kitchen or at the store for me. I just have to heat, eat, and repeat. Factor meals are made with high-quality ingredients and cater to a variety of dietary preferences. Whether you're keto, paleo, gluten-free, or just plain hungry like myself, Factor has you covered. I can also order snacks, smoothies, and more. So join me and discover a wide variety of easy options for the entire day, like breakfast and midday bites. Plus, Factor meals are delicious and satisfying. You'll never get bored with their rotating menu of over 20 options every week. Don't miss the opportunity to save time and money and enjoy the Super Bowl like never before. Order Factor today and get ready to kick back and relax with your favorite team. Head to factormeals.com/CPPicks50 and use code CPPicks50 to get 50% off your first box and 2 free wellness shots per box while subscription is active. That's code CPPicks50 at factormeals.com/CPPicks50 to get 50% off your first box and 2 free wellness shots per box while subscription is active. And now, back to the show.
So now we got to talk obviously about the Chiefs, coming into this game.
And I'm stick with the Niners for a second, though. For
I
1 second,
I want to come back to them. I think from a building the line perspective, we'll talk about both teams, like matchups and stuff like that. But just from like how to.
I'm hype, man. I'm hype. I'm sorry. I apologize.
We got to just make sure everybody knows like why this line exists the way that it does before we can even bet on it, right? Because the first thing is like understand what the line is and what you're betting into before you decide which side you want to bet into. After that. So obviously, as you mentioned, you hit it right on the head, right? Where it's like the Chiefs come in and they win this game, but like they literally didn't score a point in the second half. And one of my favorite prop bets for the AFC Championship game was that the first half was going to be a higher scoring half than the second half. And it was like one of the easiest in retrospect bets of all time because, there was 3 touchdowns in the first 4 possessions in the game. And then there was literally none the rest of the way. And then there was just 3 points in the second half because the Chiefs, as they have all season, I think I cited that they were like 6th in first half points, but like 26th in second half points. And it happened again. They didn't score a point. And if they blow that lead, which they're a Zay Flowers using momentum and science and gravity, without extending his hand, he gets in the end zone. If he just hugs the football like it's his like dog, he can just fall into the end zone there. And I think we have a different game at that point because I don't think Lamar Jackson throws into triple coverage trying to force a touchdown down 10 because they're only down 3 and they have Justin Tucker in their back pocket and basically a tie game once you get to like the 30-yard line, right? And so everything kind of, flips around that maybe we're looking at a tie game late. And listen, maybe the Chiefs win that game because they get have to have that sort of offensive shot of life or whatever. They need the stress. I don't know. All I know is I saw 5 punts from the Chiefs in that second half of the game. And it's funny, but because they come out and they sort of hit the Ravens early and take that 7-point lead early and then of course extend it to a 10-point lead at half, everybody just kind of sits there for the second half and kind of goes like, oh, I was such an idiot for betting against Patrick Mahomes getting points. But again, it's like they didn't score a point in the second half. So like, are you really that much of an idiot? Because when you look at it and you go, okay, every game that you bet on, in theory, obviously you don't have time for this, especially on like a regular NFL Sunday where you've bet on every single game and it's time to move on to the next week. But like, especially in the playoffs, you get to look back and go like, okay, what was I right about? What was I wrong about from a handicapping perspective? And it's like, honestly, the only thing I was sort of wrong about in liking the Ravens in that game, because I nailed the Chiefs point total exactly. I thought the game would be up 27-17 Ravens, right? And so 17 points to the Chiefs, okay, got that. Okay, well, why didn't the Ravens get 27 points? And it's, as you mentioned, right? Like, obviously, everybody at this point, 2 weeks later, has sort of referenced the fact that they handed the ball off 6 times in the game altogether. And Gus Edwards got 1 carry in the first half for 15 yards and just never got another carry until like midway through the third quarter. And so you're sitting there going like, if I had because my job is to write, preview articles for these games, right? And, you try to be as accurate as possible or predict the future as best you can. But really, fundamentally, it's all about probabilities and using what you know about these teams and sort of extrapolating that into matchups and where teams have advantages. If I had written down in a preview, Shell, that the Ravens were going, the first line of the preview was like, the Ravens are going to hand the ball off 6 times. I don't know what the second line would have been, right? Like, what's my backing for that opinion, right? If that's my opinion going into that game is that the Ravens aren't going to run the ball after literally, you mentioned, like, I'm pretty sure Kyle Shanahan has tape of the last game. It's like, did the Ravens have tape of the Bills Chiefs game? Because apparently not, because they're literally saying, like, Chris Jones, and we talked about this right after the game, is like, they're like, how you feeling, blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, man, we got to figure out how to stop this run. And it's like, Chris Jones is telling you directly after the game, he's telling you his cards. He's like, yeah, man, I got a couple of jacks here. Come at me. And it's just like, they just chose not to. And everybody can kind of say like Spagnuolo. And it's like, if there was a bunch of turnovers or this, that, or whatever, like I can hear that. It's just, I can't imagine there was anything pre-snap that would make the Ravens shy away from doing the thing that they're literally the best in the league at doing, which is run the ball. Like, there was no like 10 men in the box situation where it's like, oh, we can't run against this front. It's like they didn't even try. And the thing about the Edwards thing is like, the 1 carry, if it was for 2 yards, you go, okay, they tried it once and it didn't work. The 1 carry for 15 yards and then just to never do it again is just like, it's so beyond the realm of comprehension that it's like, we're trying our best to handicap these games and figure out what these teams are going to do and how they're going to do it and how successful they're going to do it. And then if they just don't, or they throw the ball 20 out of 25 first down plays, you just go like, what was going to be my argument for that if I was able to predict that correctly? So you can't really beat yourself up about it, which is the point. But what my point for this coming game is like, if it was, oh man, the Chiefs really bowed up and the Ravens tried to run the ball 20 times and they got stuffed for 55 yards and Patrick Mahomes, had more than, I hit a bet on him under 1.5 passing touchdowns, right? Which I kind of like forgot I had. And then the game ends. And it's like, oh yeah, they only scored 2 touchdowns because they got the first one so early. You just assume another one's coming. And it just never did. And so if it was Patrick Mahomes, not having to punt 5 times in the second half, and if it was the defense stopping the Ravens at what the Ravens do best, I would be with everybody on the Chiefs. And I would be sitting here going like, yeah, man, like they got it figured out and like it's different and blah, 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 blah. But you mentioned like McCaffrey, obviously. And like, why wouldn't the 49ers forget the Ravens tape? Because that's useless at this point because this is nonsense of a game plan. But like, why wouldn't they do the same thing essentially that the Bills did, right? Which was like a lot like running up the middle and that sort of thing. And so like, neither of these teams have a particularly good run defense, so the same can be said on either side. But like, the Chiefs want the ball in Patrick Mahomes' hand.
Correct.
The 49ers will, because they have such good skill position players, will concede that having the ball in Brock Purdy's hands is fine, but like they would love to have it in Christian McCaffrey's hands 25 times in this game, right? And it's like, so I can't base the bet off of, oh, Patrick Mahomes and like the Chiefs beating the Ravens last week when it's not going to be the same thing that they're facing. And God help us if it is. Because if it's Kyle Shanahan throwing the ball 40 times in a competitive game, like I might blow my top. And honestly,
you might blow your top. Hold on a second.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an emotional or financial investment, like,
how about both? Hold on. How about both?
Yeah, okay. or in some cases both, right? And so, yeah, like how much is your soul worth, right? That might be how much I have on 49ers. So anyway, so I just look at it and I go, okay, like the Chiefs are, in a weird way, like the Chiefs were sort of benefited from being outdoors in these last 3 games. They certainly benefited in week 1, right? Week 2, the weather wasn't bad, and that game came down to like literally a back and forth. And can you make this play? Can you not make this play? And whatever. Like that was as purest form of a toss-up game as you can possibly find. And then the Ravens last week just chose, I say that they were complicit in not, in allowing the Chiefs to win that game and not coming back when it was like right there, literally in their hands as they're about to cross, over the goal line. So, if it was a Chiefs performance, or if any of these Chiefs performances were like, oh yeah, they figured, the run defense out and like the offense is still great, because, we'll get to props here a little bit later on, but I'll spoil, burn one early here. But like I got Mahomes under 262 passing yards. Yeah. Just go ahead and look at the game log. Right. Yeah. Like he rarely goes for that many yards. Right. And part of that is because of, Pacheco being, effective, et cetera, but also like they don't have an explosive offense the way that they used to. So they don't, even when they're scoring, points, touchdowns, it's taking them longer to do it. And so when it takes you longer to do it, there's going to be less possessions in the game. And when the other team can move the ball, like the Bills did, like the 49ers can, and honestly, in the second half, right, there were a couple of long drives from the Ravens as well. Obviously, the Zay Flowers fiasco, ended a really long drive. When other teams are able to sort of move the ball slowly down the field as well, just in general, there are going to be less possessions in the game, right? So there was only, I think, 10 possessions each in that game, in the AFC title game. So when you look at this game and the market being super interested, and you could see, and you could watch the point spread, right? Because the line opened, again, sportsbooks, odds makers aren't stupid. They go, okay, our look ahead was 3. The Chiefs won this game. The 49ers did not win convincingly. We can't make this line 3. So they make it 2.5, right? They're never going to give you 3 after what we saw on that weekend, right? And what happens? Chiefs money comes in anyway, right? And it comes in for like a day and a half, because it's like, that's the recency bias. That's the immediacy of people being like, Chiefs, man, like, oh, here we go, like, blah, 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 and all this stuff that like doesn't really apply from last game to this game. And then a couple of days go by and the line comes down to -1. And the people who weren't sort of like just, and maybe even the people that were piling in money, they sit back and they go like, hold on a second. This is still betting. This is still a market. This is still buy low, sell high. This is still like, what is the best price that we're going to get on this, that, or whatever. This isn't predicting who's going to win the game. This is playing probabilities, buying things at a good price. 49ers -1, given the fact, as we mentioned, that the high point of this season, they were probably a 4.5 to 5 point favorite. Even last week or prior to last week, they'd be a 3.5 point favorite. 49ers -1 looks like a really good deal. And so that the 49ers money starts to come in, right? And you start to hear reports like the big bets are on the 49ers, but most of the bets are on the Chiefs, right? And then, of course, most people take that to assume that the 49ers are some automatic lock. Obviously, that's not the case. And now we sit here at 2. And, you said, okay, well, like, are they taking a stand, or are we sort of just allowing this Chiefs money to kind of come in? And the answer to that is yes, because let's put it this way. As that number came down to -1, even without any money coming in, as sportsbooks kind of sit back and look at it, the line for the Super Bowl is never going to be pick'em, right? It doesn't make any sense for the line to be pick'em, because right now you have 2 different markets. You have a point spread market and you have a money line market, all right? And if you like the Chiefs at +2, what are you going to do, Shal? You're just going to take them on the money line. You're just going to take them on the money line. Right. And if you like the 49ers, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to take -2, maybe even the -2.5 that was out there. And that leaves this tiny little gap, right? Where if this game lands on 1 in the Super Bowl with everybody on -2 or everybody on Chiefs money line, if this lands 49ers -1, do you understand the windfall that's going to happen for all of these sports books.
I'm aware. Yes.
Like the biggest betting day, the biggest handle day of the year. And of course, at this point, every year goes by and more states get legalized. So it's ever, right? Every year it's ever. And especially with this game, right? And so like even the slightest possibility. And by the way, with new overtime rules, right? Like teams are more likely to win by one because you're more incentivized to get the touchdown. The other team then gets the ball. Some teams might want to go for 2 after they score the first touchdown. And you might get into that situation where, okay, you go for 2, you miss it. The other team goes down, scores the touchdown, kicks the extra point, and they win by 1, right? Like it's not a large possibility necessarily, but it is certainly a possibility. And obviously with 2-point conversions and missed, listen, we got a sketchy kicker on one side, which you're more than familiar with. There might be a scenario where this game lands on 1. Or this, point spread gets or the margin gets a little weird where you might have a kind of a weird, winning margin. So anyway, so like it's just kind of never going to be pick'em, and you can just sort of sit there and take KC +2 money, or sort of offer KC +2 because people aren't going to take it. They're just going to take the money line, right? So like you can make it pick'em, you can make it -2. You're still going to take Chiefs money line no matter what, right? And the thing is, as this Chiefs money line money comes in, what happens to that market? It drags down the 49ers money line price to the right now. There's some -120s available. Now, listen, this is a -2 point spread. This isn't like the craziest thing ever, but like a -2 point spread usually indicates like about a -135, -140 favorite, money line. -120. Like that's pretty darn close to -110, right? So like you can bet the 49ers money line at a discount even beyond. Now think about it this way. If we thought that the point spread at one point in our lives, not that long ago, call it December, literally 6 weeks ago, would have been 4.5. What's the money line there, right?
Yeah.
Close to -200. At 3.5, what's the money line there? Like -180, -190, like close to -200. So we're getting something that 2 weeks ago was close to -200 for -120 because of the interest in the Chiefs playing a completely different game, in the sort of soggy conditions in Baltimore against a team that we talk about every time they play a playoff game as being this like unproven playoff, squad against a team that like, listen, obviously the Chiefs have the experience advantage because they have experience advantage over everybody, but like Brock Purdy's now played 3 3.25 playoff games, right? Like even the least experienced dude on the 49ers still is going into his 5th playoff game, obviously his first.
And like those last 2 playoff games are like big time, like
big
gut
boy
check moments.
Yeah.
Like, put your big balls on the table. Like I'm here. I need to make a comeback.
Yeah.
But no, for real, right? Like he didn't play well, but found a way to win. And that stuff matters.
Yeah, so you can tell me that the 49ers are the less experienced team, and if the Chiefs win the game, which, by the way, like, absolutely a possibility that they do. Obviously. And if they do, people will be like, oh, Mahomes, oh, Chiefs experience. And it's just like, no, you know what? Like, one team, and honestly, and that's why I sort of referenced the Super Bowl 54, rewatching that game yesterday, it's like the 49ers were up 10 points with like 8 minutes to go in that game.
I'm aware.
And I you know what I mean? But like the rest of us kind of forget that because even when you look back at the score and it was a 31-21 game, you forget that they were up like 10 with like less than 10 to go. And you're like,
and because you just watched it, what turned that game? They're up 10 and they finally hit over the top to Tyreek Hill. And that's what really changed the game. And
well, but even before that, because that was so there's a couple of things. I'm sort of done with the point spread. I should just mention, I have bet on the 49ers at that depressed money line. So I've skipped the -2. I'm taking the 49ers -125 or better. There are certainly better out there. I just wanted to get that on the record before we sort of talk about this. But watching that game yesterday, there's 2 things that sort of stood out to me. One was the fact that it wasn't just a 10-point lead with less than 10 minutes to go. It was a 10-point lead with the ball. Yeah. And, it was talked about after the game, but obviously certain things that were talked about after the game sort of die over the course of history. Garoppolo missed a wide open George Kittle he missed the read on it. He didn't even attempt to throw to him.
I got you.
That would have converted a 3rd down that who knows what would have happened there. Certainly would have taken another couple of minutes off the clock and who knows sort of what happens after that. But the other thing that was sort of frustrating to me as I'm watching this game, at the end of the first half in a 10-10 game, your guy, Kyle Shanahan, has the ball at his own 20 with 55 seconds left and 3 timeouts.
Yeah.
And he conservatives it all the way to just like 2 runs to take time off the clock. And then Andy Reid, and this is the dichotomy between these two, which makes me nervous, of course, because I'm on the 49ers this week. Andy Reid takes the timeout on the 3rd down with like 20 something seconds left. Like Andy Reid is so into getting the ball back with less than 20 seconds that he's willing to take a timeout and give the 49ers sort of a free play at the 1st down, which, like, by the way, they get. And so it's just funny to see like Shanahan like turtling in that moment. And they probably should have gotten a field goal out of it because George Kittle got called for one of the sketchiest offensive pass interferences of all time when they would have caught the ball. But even if he doesn't get called for that, they get the ball at like the 20-yard line or 15-yard line with 6 seconds left, which, like, okay, you would have got your field goal, and who knows how that sort of changes the rest of the game. But like, if you had just tried from the 55-second mark, right, maybe it doesn't come down to needing that offensive pass interference to go your way, and you might have got a touchdown out of it, right? Like, that's burning a possession. And so it's, for me, as much as I start on the 49ers at minus 120, minus 125, because it is objectively the best price, the best deal on the table. If you're sitting there going, okay, there are 4 things I can buy here. Chiefs money line, Chiefs +2, 49ers money line, 49ers -2. The best price, the best deal, the thing you should walk away from the table with is the 49ers money line. But from a football standpoint, and that's where we'll sort of throw it back to you because I know you had something to add here. I'm not married to the 49ers in this game because of my concerns about what version of Kyle Shanahan we're going to get. And because they come into this game favored, that if this game is tied 10-10 going into the half, the Chiefs will probably be favored to win the game. If this game is 10-10 going into half, and it's the same scenario where Kyle Shanahan, he also earlier in the game kicked a field goal on 4th and 2, something that even 4 years later, I think is going to get absolutely carved, especially if your kicker is a rookie kicker who is more than suspect at this point. If he's still on this BS about, kicking these field goals in these circumstances and
you have Christian McCaffrey
and effectively kneeling and a far better team, a better offense, by the way, because there's a lot of Tevin Coleman in that game. Not gonna lie to you.
Kendrick Bourne, who I'm not knocking, but like
a lot of Emmanuel Sanders, right? Like, who is a good player, don't get me wrong, but he was like 1 year away from being out of the league. He
was the number 2 receiver.
Yeah. And so it's like, and Debo is a rookie, right? And they're, and so it's like, this is a better version of course, that team, right down to even the quarterback. So if he's still doing this stuff, but this game is still sort of close or tied, or even if they have a small lead, I have to start thinking about the Chiefs. Now, the problem with that is, what have we said about the Chiefs already? They don't score points in the second half. Yeah. So it's like, I can't even really be that excited to bet the Chiefs live because, like, the Chiefs' best chance at winning against Baltimore was getting that early lead, right? Like, I don't know if that's going to, go the same way if the game is tied at halftime versus being up 10, right? So it's a very sort of tricky game that, you just kind of have to buy the best price available and then just kind of hope for the best.
Yeah, from a football standpoint, I look at this game and I honestly think with the Chiefs, their inability to score in the second half is more based off the fact I think Andy Reid and company do such a good job with their game plan coming in the playoffs, right? We're doing the microcosm of the playoffs, but it's like you get off to this good start, you're able to score, you've picked apart what you're able to do against the other team's defense, but then that defense adjusts. And now we're into the game that's going on right now. And then the game that's going on right now is the Chiefs offense isn't that good.
Patrick Mahomes, the X's and O's, Jims and Joes thing, it's X's and O's in the first half.
Yes.
Right. And then it becomes Jims and Joes in the second half.
And like Patrick Mahomes is that good that he's able to like elevate and like read defenses and, look off the safety so that he's going to find Valdez-Scantling wide open. And even though Valdez-Scantling almost tripped over his own feet and dropped that ball, right? Yeah. He caught it. He got it. But he almost dropped that. So like all of these things, you're looking at the Chiefs and you're saying, hey, great job to get to where they're at. Because I think what you did in terms of bringing up where the Chiefs were, around Christmas, let's say, where you're losing to the Raiders, right? It's like to think about where they were able to get to to get back to the Super Bowl after watching that team where Travis Kelce's looking mega washed, right? Where they're struggling with their running game. They don't have receivers to throw to. They don't know what's going on, but yet you're in the Super Bowl. That's a massive, massive feat, which tells me that's the institution of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. Like, you're able to overcome that. Okay, now the ask is bigger. The Niners throughout the whole season, when healthy, they put up points. And talking about the last 2 weeks where the Niners are down at halftime, because I will agree with you on the terrible Shanahan playbook to start the last 2 games. Just like, I don't know what those game plans were, but they were just insane to start both of those games.
I'm terrified that Shanahan, who decided to throw the ball almost exclusively against the Packers, who were a bad run defense, and then going against the Lions, who literally admit to everyone, our defense was so bad last year, we just want to do one thing correctly this year. And we've chosen, essentially based on our personnel, to stop the run. And Shanahan comes out and is like, you guys didn't like that I didn't hand off to McCaffrey enough? Watch this. I'm going to hand it off to him like 12 times in the first half. And it's just like, no, man, like different team, stop playing into what the Lions want you to do. And like, that's obviously one of, it's funny, as these concerns add up, you're like, why are you on the 49ers again? It's like, I know. Because it's like, yeah, man, I'm worried about Shanahan's aggressiveness. And as you just mentioned, like, I'm worried about the game plan, and it's so sad that in the Super Bowl, and this is why we talk about this every week about these coaches, every one of them is just a dope. Right. And, as much as like, it's all levels, it's all relative. I mean, listen, Bill Belichick couldn't get a job in this offseason because like, that's what organizations think. Right. Like, everybody's just kind of a moron in all of this. So anyway, so the point is, it's like, I'm worried about Shanahan not being aggressive, but I'm also worried that he doesn't realize that there is an optimum way to play against these teams, which is just
I think he just feels like he has his game plan. That's what it is. And he's sticking to it. So like last week's game, as you mentioned, here, we're going to run with McCaffrey. And then in the third quarter, it's like, oh yeah, we have this Debo guy. Maybe we'll like pass it to him on some screens and stuff. And Debo's like busting and I'm like, where were these plays in the first half? Like, but that's his game plan. That's what he's setting up. And so if we see this game playing out in the ways that, these teams have played recently, we're using the recency bias of, okay, let's say the Chiefs are able to, be up a touchdown at half, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say. Yeah, we've seen that the Niners offense has the ability to figure out, okay, this is what we can do against this defense. We can put points up on the board in the second half. Whereas on the flip side, we haven't seen the same thing from the Kansas City Chiefs. Right. And if we've been waiting for the Niners pass rush to figure some things out here, and you got Hargrave going against their backup guard, who I know I'm deep into the weeds here, but it's a Super Bowl. We're here. Totally right. Like, these things matter now, right? You got that pass rush ready to go, and you don't have to get to Mahomes, but you have to like not make him comfortable. And the dudes that he's throwing to, there's no Tyreek Hill, right? Like, you can figure out how we're going to try to slow down Travis Kelce, who has looked good the last couple weeks, but again, let's use a whole season sample size. And the 2 weeks of the Super Bowl, I really think gives you a chance to kind of reset to like, okay, right? Like, the gauntlet of what the 2 weeks are, cool. But like, what are we? What do we do? And the Niners and my guy Wilkes, who I've not been a fan of, I've talked about this all year. I'm interested to see what that dude comes up with in this, Super Bowl as well, what that matchup is going to be like, because again, the blueprint is there. You can watch the tape to see what Mahomes and company struggle with and how to adjust to them and figure out how to, if your man's Valdez Scandling is going to beat you. Okay, cool. You got to tip your cap and be like, all right, MVS had a massive game, but I'm going to let that happen. Right. And if that's how they're going to win, cool. You tip your cap, you walk away, you say, hey, it wasn't our chance. It wasn't our day.
Yeah. And so quick interjection, another little bonus prop here. I've got over Marquez Valdez-Scantling 19.5 receiving yards in the game, because at this point, like, one, he's still on the field right?
Yeah.
And going into the postseason, right? Everybody's complaining about the Chiefs is that nobody catches the balls, right? And like they basically launched Kadarius Toney into the sun, and because of the drops. And like people are talking like, oh, is he going to play this week? Is he going to play? You can't play that guy this week. Like, what are you crazy?
Like they were playing Hardman.
Well, and so that's where I was going to go with the second thing, where it's like, so Valdez-Scantling plays all the time. The number's only 19.5. He's out there. He's caught 3 consecutive contested balls in these big games. So like, there's at least a modicum of trust that has sort of been built up there. And so if you might get that on 1 catch, right?
Exactly,
or certainly 2 with the way that he runs routes. But the other interesting thing that was sort of kind of stark when you watch these games and these teams every week, you go, okay, this is what the Chiefs look like. This is the personnel that they use. This is the plays that they run. Like, by and large what's coming. It's a lot of, obviously, Travis Kelce. It's a lot of Rashee Rice on crossing routes and Valdez-Scantling just burning it down the sidelines to, getting some hard cardio in. But like watching that game, that Super Bowl 54, you forget what the Chiefs offense structurally looked like with Tyreek Hill. And the threat of him just buzzing like the Dolphins offense looks like now, of course. The threat of him just buzzing behind the line of scrimmage over and over and over and getting these starts and then stops. And he's catching this pass because no one can cover that because they don't know where he is. Like, it's the reason he led the league in receiving yards this year, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't know in that, like, Tyreek Hill's awesome. But like, you forget in our mind's eye, when we talk about the Chiefs, there is that lingering thing that makes us think of Super Bowl 54, of the other Super Bowls that they went to prior to last year. That is that offense where it's like, man, like, it's like we talked about going into last week, and it didn't sort of end up working out in a winning bet necessarily, but like, a lot of the Chiefs and a lot of the Mahomes stuff is with that offense that I watched in that game yesterday. And it's not that he's not awesome. It's not that he's not potentially the greatest of all time, though I think getting a little super loose with that so far, relatively early. But it's just like, yeah, man, I put on the Buccaneers Chiefs Super Bowl, right? And like, tell me like how well that, how it's sort of this inevitability, like that Patrick Mahomes is inevitable, so to speak, right? Put on the Bengals, AFC Championship game, like stuff.
We mentioned it, right? Like Brady lost Super Bowls, right? Like that happens. Right?
If Nick Foles can beat Tom Brady in a Super Bowl, Brock Purdy can beat Patrick Mahomes in a Super Bowl. So let's just start there, right? Like, this isn't some inevitability, right? And so again, like, it just has to come down to like a football thing. And, unfortunately at this point, because the 49ers, fortunately or unfortunately, like, maybe it just gets us, maybe the 49ers 2 playoff games so far gets us the deal of the century. Like, let's put it that way, right? Like,
no, definitely.
And it's funny because I saw like people doing victory laps about having the, Chiefs plus 3.5. The people at Chiefs plus 3.5 against Baltimore doing the victory lap thing. But those are the same people that will tell you that like closing line value is like the most important thing when it comes to sports betting. And that line closed 4.5.
Yeah.
In a playoff game.
Yeah. So
like, you're telling me that it was an inevitability that, I'm not saying you specifically, I'm saying sort of the intruders into the sports betting space, or even the people who honestly know better. Like, you're telling me that you're some genius because you bet, Patrick Mahomes plus 3.5 when that line closed 4.5. Like, that doesn't add up for me, right? And so the point here is like, again, what are we getting a deal on? Are you getting a deal on the idea of like Patrick Mahomes as an underdog is like the point. The whole thing is you're supposed to be getting a deal on it. Like, oh, Patrick Mahomes should never be an underdog, and we're getting like this sort of incredible deal because people don't, somebody's not paying attention, and by making Patrick Mahomes an underdog, as if like the Super Bowl isn't going to be sort of like as correct of a line, at least from a perception standpoint, as it possibly can. But that's the crazy thing about this, because of all of the stuff that we've just talked about. The deal is on the 49ers. And you don't often get a deal in the Super Bowl, right? Everybody says like Super Bowl is the most liquid market, obviously, from a betting perspective. Like, you're never going to get a deal because the line is going to be sort of pounded into correct form. And again, I'm not even making the case that the line should be -3, because listen, that would talk me into Kansas City plus 3, and maybe it should be 3 because it would talk me into Kansas City plus 3. It's just like, it's just never been money line -120. Like we talked about it and I'm pretty sure we've talked about it in the show, like over the course of the season, the latter half of the season, you could get NFC minus 120 to win the Super Bowl over the AFC. And it always felt like, oh man, like we should jump on that because that's a really good deal, because like looking at the different ratings, right? Like, and seeing on Christmas night that the Ravens were 6-point underdogs on the road to the 49ers, and the Ravens were going to be theoretically the best opponent for the 49ers. And it's like, if they're 6 points, in San Francisco, they're going to be 4 on a neutral. So why wouldn't I take minus 120, given that I don't really think much of anybody else in the NFC, and it seems like the 49ers are going to make the Super Bowl relatively easily. And here we are, and it's the same price. Like, we went from looking at that price 6 weeks ago being like, man, it seems like a minus 120 would be a great deal against anybody, to this somehow getting tightened up to the point where that just is the price. And again, I know why we've gotten there, because of the 3 games that the Chiefs have played, but just none of them have really been sort of applicable to this game, right? And it's like these, and again, like we look at the look at the Ravens, look at the Bills, right? Like, what's the story with those teams every year and everybody questioning it? It's because they just kind of clunk their heads together. Like these 2 bumbling dunderpates are just like going to screw it up. And so if you think that going into every game the Bills play, every playoff game the Bills play, and every Ravens game the Bills play, well, then why would I be super excited about a team beating those teams, right? Like, so it kind of gets all sort of twisted from a perception standpoint, where it's like, okay, you're really hyping the Chiefs now because of they beat the 2 teams that you really didn't think all that much of, or you think would, everybody kind of thinks is going to screw it up in the playoffs. Like, Lamar this, Lamar that, and it's all same old Bills, right? It's like, yeah, if it's same old Bills and Lamar can't do this or can't do that, like the Chiefs should have won those 2 games, right? And like, by the way, like we were on the Chiefs against the Bills. Like I was on the Chiefs against the Bills. I wasn't on the Chiefs last week. And again, I don't even know that was necessarily, a wrong thing. So, I mean, at the end of the day, though, you're trying to predict who's going to play well. And I just hope both of these teams play well. Listen, I hope that 49ers play well. There's a chance here, and you've watched the 49ers all season long, there's a chance the 49ers just didn't play their best game these last 2 weeks, and this might be it. This might be their best game, right? I don't know that the Chiefs have another sort of level to go here off of certainly the last 2 games, where it's just kind of like been, okay, like this is kind of the best we can do, whereas the 49ers, I think, have another gear. And so if I'm betting on both teams at their top gear, I think the 49ers are a better team.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you in it. That was the conversation we were having yesterday, actually, and I was getting crushed. I was like, hold on, let's stop with all the Mahomes is the greatest ever, because I get that and I understand that, but like, who has a better offense? Right? Like, let's seriously sit there and think about, like, you're talking about offensive weapons of McCaffrey, Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle, right? Like, and I get that Travis Kelce is quote unquote better than George Kittle, but are we talking about the Travis Kelce we've seen the last 2 weeks only, or like the full? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like Travis Kelce's running laps around George Kittle at this stage of Travis Kelce's
I think George Kittle's a better player, to be completely honest with you.
This was my this is where I'm going.
But it's the same, George Kittle in the role that he has to play, where like he's just leveling like guys bigger than him in the blocking game, and like he's required to do so, whereas Travis Kelce is just essentially like a slot receiver, right? Like, and he can be that because they can play Noah Gray and they can play Blake Bell, and use him as like a second tight end, even though he's not. He's the third or honestly first receiver. And like, if the thing was flipped, right, and Travis Kelce had to go play the role that George Kittle had to play, it'd be kind of a rough scene, right? Like Kelce would be getting tossed around by these defensive ends that that Kittle has to participate in blocking, and or linebackers that Kittle has to block. And on the flip side, if Kittle got to sort of play third wide receiver, like slot wide receiver, this is a guy who's got 1,000 yards this year. And again, a little bonus bet here: you can bet on this week who's going to have the most receiving yards in the game. It's a 1-game scenario, right? And so stay with me on this. If you go back and you look at the 49ers and who had the most receiving yards, obviously you throw out week 18 because the guys didn't play. There was a week where you'll remember against Arizona, Christian McCaffrey fell down, got back up, and caught a 41-yard touchdown pass because the Cardinals defense is so brutal. A guy could be lying on the ground at one point, 30 yards down the field and still catch a touchdown pass. Christian McCaffrey actually led the 49ers that day because of that pass in receiving yards. Of the other 15 games during this season, the three guys, Kittle, Ayuk, and Debo, how would you split up those three guys as to, like, of those 15 games, how many did each one of them lead in receiving yards? Lead the team
Kittle,
in receiving yards?
Ayuk, and Debo.
Yeah.
So
you got 15 games, Kittle, Ayuk, Debo. How many did each of them lead the team in receiving yards?
I feel like the first lead goes to Kittle because I feel like he's more consistently getting receiving yards, whereas Ayuk has like one game where they're just hitting him on the deep ball and then other games where they're not. And Debo gets a lot of his touches just in different ways, right? So sometimes it's a handoff and he'll bust one and go crazy, but it's not just straight receiving yards with Debo. And there's a lot of little slants and stuff, whereas Kittle, we talked about this before, there's a lot of just schemed open George Kittle running free for like 20-yard gains, and he's wide open, and that's the Shanahan, what he does. Yeah. So Kittle, I'd probably then go Ayuk, then Debo, because I just think Debo does a lot of rushing too.
Yeah, so you're on the right track. It's actually 5, 5, and 5. So the tight end on the 49ers has led the team in receiving as many times as each one of those receivers. But the interesting thing is, though the receivers are plus 250, plus 300 to lead the game in receiving yards, George Kittle is plus 700 at the score bet to lead the game. And Kittle had 1,000, I think it was like 1,020, 1,040, something like that, kind of like a weird half-ish round number. He had that many receiving yards. In those 5 games, he had like 540 yards combined. In the other 11 games that he played this season, obviously week 18, he didn't play. He had the remaining, right? Less than 500. So he had more than half of his receiving yards in those 5 games and less than half of his receiving yards in the other 11 games. So the point is, it's like when Kittle's on, when he's in the game plan, when they're finding him for 3-4 catches or more than that, it's big yardage. It's 100 yards a game, essentially, right? 500 over 5 games versus 400 over 11 games, which is about 40 yards. His prop total is like 47.5, I think, something along those lines. There's a lot of numbers floating in my head right now, so you guys will have to double check that. But the point is if you're going to take the over on Kittle, why not take the high end stuff? Because when he goes over, he goes way over, right? So instead of being like, oh, let's wager, minus 115 to win back 1, like, no, let's go for kind of the gusto. Let's use, get the ladder going, right? Let's go for Kittle over 100 yards receiving, like boost the odds up, because it isn't, oh, will he or won't he? It's when he does big. And I think against the Chiefs, against that team where they have really good corners in L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie, those two guys are going to have a decent day, or a decent matchup at the very least for Ayuk and Debo. I think Kittle is the one who's going to be running kind of free here in the middle of the field. So, big sort of George Kittle game from that perspective, and potentially some sort of, some odds boosting there, whether it's plus 700 for leading the game in receiving yards or him to like go for 100 yards receiving at, sort of a better price than just taking the over. So another little sprinkle job there as far as a prop is concerned.
No, I'm so interested to see how this game plays out, because I just think it's one of those things where, if you paid attention to what happened with the Chiefs last week, and, I think they won, they did their part. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It was just such an interesting thing though, like watching how those games actually occurred. And same thing with the Lions game and the Niners. I don't think enough credit is being given to Brock Purdy for making some of those big plays to come back on. And I know everyone keeps saying, oh, the fluke play to Ayuk, but it's like that was going to be called pass interference if he doesn't catch it. So they were getting the ball 100%. At that spot anyways, right? So it's like, cool, like I get it that, we're saying, oh, this fluke play like changed the entire game because it bounced up and then he caught it. It's like, yeah, but they were going to call pass interference. So they're really making the move there anyways, right? But even just the scramble plays that Brock Purdy made on that drive late as well, like, I don't know, man. Watching, you mentioned watching that last Niners Super Bowl, and, Shanahan at times, like, being very cautious, we'll say.
The offense is so basic. in that game.
For sure.
It's so basic.
But watching Jimmy G, I get it. Like, because the play that I remember, like there were plays where Jimmy G's about to get sacked and he's like two-hand passing, like chest passing the ball away.
Yeah,
I'm
that
like,
was at the end where it was like, I think it was 4th down. But
I get it, but it's like
in the first half, there was one where he just throws it into like open field and like a Chiefs defender comes and just intercepts it. Like it was like he was taking punt. And it's so funny. And like, it's, you know, I'm glad you mentioned it because now it starts to make me sort of think, right? Like where it's like, watching that game, the Chiefs offense was so dynamic. And like we talked about, like the Tyreek Hill, the motion, all of that stuff. And I forgot to mention, because you mentioned Mecole Hardman or whatever, but like, it's funny that they have these guys on the roster, the Hardmans, the Tonys, etc., to try to like do the stuff that Hill does, at least from a pre-snap perspective.
Yeah.
But it's like, no one respects it at all.
Yeah.
So it's honestly, they've kind of had to just go to like, all right, let's just play basic B offense here, right? Where it's like, which is crazy with Patrick Mahomes. And then you watch the 49ers offense and it's like, yeah, there's some sort of like fun stuff. A lot of obviously like handoffs to Debo, etc. But like, it's like you're watching it and you're going like, man, if that was Christian McCaffrey instead of Tevin Coleman, like you understand why they traded for Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
Because you're like, and even Mostert, right, who's on the field there, who obviously had a great season for the Dolphins and like showed that he can be, you know, obviously super effective in that role. But you're still just like, yeah, but he's not catching the ball out of the backfield like McCaffrey. He's not like being that type of a problem. And so if you look at the 49ers offense now compared to the offense in that Super Bowl, it's like both teams have flipped, but in like a bad way for the Chiefs and a good way, just from like a visually sort of like chaotic, whatever type of a way. Right.
Yeah.
So it's really an interesting watch when you go like, these are two of the same teams. There's a lot of the same personnel, but like it just looks different.
And it's also too, like if you need if you're betting on an offense to score when needed late, like I know it says you'd thinking, oh, Patrick Mahomes, but like, I don't know, man, if you know that the Chiefs have to throw the ball, right? And you're going against a Niners pass rush and like you double Travis Kelce and it's like, all right, Rashee Rice is going to run this slant that we know he's going to run. What are we going to like? I don't know. There's just a lot of things here that I think line up for the Niners that people are kind of overlooking here because of the recency bias and like, oh, you struggled against the Lions. It's like, yeah, but the Lions are a good team. Like they made like they aren't like just like some chumps that woke up and found themselves. You know, it's like, oh, well, the Niners run defense sucks. It's like, I don't know if you know this, but Gibbs and Montgomery are a pretty good backfield duo, right? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, there's so many things that I think we're missing from the actual football talk.
Yeah.
That's just kind of discrediting the Niners heading into this game.
I mean,
I don't get it.
Think about it this way, right? If the Lions literally took every single draft pick they have in the upcoming draft and only drafted secondary, right? They just drafted defensive backs. How much of a problem are the Lions going to be next year, right? Because like they got to hit on something out of that group, along with like going into the offseason and like, you know, trying to sign, you know, certain maybe a veteran defensive back here or there, right? Like how much of a problem is that team going into next season? Because essentially they have kind of everything else, right? And that was the big concern going into the game as far as like the Lions' chances of winning. We're like, are they going to be able to stop the 49ers pass offense? Which is why it was so infuriating that Shanahan kept handing the ball off in the first half, because it's like, no, just like do the throwing and you're going to be fine. Like get it now before it gets like tougher against this Lions team next season, right? And it's like this, you have to win this game because it's only they're not going to be 7.5 point favorites next year when you play this team. And like you mentioned, like that's why that there's this difference, because last week I was like, if in the case of the Kansas City Baltimore game, I was like, if you do like Kansas City and you believe in the Patrick Mahomes like thing, as if like, and again, I don't think he was the reason they won the game. I think the Ravens just sheer ineptitude from start to finish, taking dumb penalties, like, you know, that led to 3 points that honestly could have, you know, changed the game. Like Zay Flowers just sticking the ball, like rookie mistake, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Like these things, like 2 to 3 plays, man, like watch every playoff game ever, 2 to 3 plays, kind of no matter like what the score, you know, obviously there's a couple of blowouts there where it probably wouldn't have mattered, but like every one of these playoffs comes down to 2 or 3 plays. And if you're doing dumb stuff, like you're allowing a good team, not a great team, a good team to win the game. And like I said to you, I was like, man, if you just like the Chiefs, like forget about the points, just take them on the money line, because If this game is close, I want Patrick Mahomes and I don't necessarily want Lamar Jackson. That doesn't apply to this game, all right? Like it's not a Brock Purdy thing. It's a 49ers offense thing. Like I trust the 49ers offense in a late game, down 4, down 3, whatever, 2 or 3 minutes to go. I trust the 49ers offense to put together a solid drive to win the game more than I would the Baltimore offense, even at home, right?
Of course.
And that's the difference in this game. And again, because we're not requiring the 49ers to win by 7.5, 8 points, right? We're only requiring them, especially with the money line at that price that it is, we're only asking them to win this game. And again, I hope it doesn't come down to the kicker necessarily, but I trust the 49ers offense to be able to do that, because as much as everybody goes like, well, the Chiefs defense is much improved, and it obviously is. Like, this is still the NFL in 2024. There's only so much defense can do. And the Ravens defense played great. Like Kyle Hamilton was riding Travis Kelce like a pony in the end zone, like a legal riding of a pony. Like he was draped on him. And the offense is just too good. And and Kelce made the catch, right? And if he doesn't make that catch, who knows sort of how things sort of extrapolate throughout the rest of the game, right? Because obviously, with 17 total points, every point mattered in that game. And so, again, you just look at those three, honestly, one penalty, right? This Kyle Van Noy with the stupid penalty when the Chiefs were honestly looking to run out the clock. Zay Flowers not tucking the ball in.
Just that whole Zay Flowers drive.
And but he almost not Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumbered it, right? Where he totally redeemed himself, except for at the last second he deemed himself and just completely blew it. But it's honestly, the Kelce catch, Flowers fumble, and that penalty by Kyle Van Noy, it's the three sort of hinging type of plays. You never know when they're going to happen necessarily. Right. And sometimes it looks like it's a game hinging play where Lamar Jackson catches his own pass and starts running down the field. And then they end up having to punt anyway. So it doesn't actually matter. Right. It's just an Instagram play at that point.
Yeah.
Right. So you just never know. But the point is these things are so tight. And I just kind of trust the 49ers. I trust the 49ers more than I do the Ravens. It's not even sort of a 49ers versus Chiefs thing. Right. And it's I kind of just trust the 49ers to play those first 58 minutes even a little bit better.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. We saw that it was right there for the Ravens. It's just the Ravens didn't see that it was right there for the Ravens. And their ability to execute, we've seen what the Ravens tried to do in the second half, we saw the Niners do 2 straight weeks, and they just aren't getting the credit for coming back against a Green Bay team whose offense has looked so good the back half of the season, and a Lions team that was one of the best teams in the league for the majority of the season. And just the Niners, because everyone had them on this high pedestal heading into the playoffs, and then they had trouble in the playoffs. It's we downgraded them. It's oh, well, I guess they're not really that team. It's you get no credit for winning. It's well, you were supposed to blow out the Lions. You were supposed to blow out the Packers. Because teams get blown out in the conference championship all the time. All the time that happens, right?
Yeah, and if because the Packers and the Lions don't have this track record, right? The assumption is that they can't have it going forward. But like I said with the Lions, I feel the same thing about the Packers, right? Especially with a new defensive coordinator next year. I think the whole division next year is going to be a problem. But I certainly think the Packers and the Lions are sort of among, obviously not even head and shoulders, but at least sort of head above those, the other two teams. I think that whole division is going to be an issue. And I think the Packers are going to be a problem for everybody next year. And we'll look back on that and not think it that crazy that those 2 games are close. And that's not just hindsight. I said that before both of those games, because I was I kind of have a feeling these 2 teams are kind of the next 2 teams to be sort of in contention with the 49ers, going forward. And I don't know how many even years the 49ers necessarily have left. That's going to be on the shoulders of guys who take a beating, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle, right? To see how long that the 49ers are good for.
I'm glad you brought this up, because this kind of also reminds me of the Rams Super Bowl a couple years ago, where it was they've been building towards this, where they've been there, they've been on the brink, they've gotten close, and then they've made key additions, add in Stafford, add in Christian McCaffrey to kind of get you over the hump. And the timing of it all, you've just been building towards this, right? You've been there. You're not worried about, oh, how do we react Super Bowl week? What do we need to do? How do we prepare? All of those things you've been through now. If you're Kyle Shanahan, we see the video getting replayed all the time of Kittle being we'll be back, blah, blah, blah. All of those things matter. right? Like that's just reality. And I'm excited. I wish this game was tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
And remembering that clip was from 4 years ago, and like, what's the lifespan of a tight end who blocks the way that Kittle does? What's the playing lifespan? Obviously.
This is it. They know that. Trent knows
this
that.
is it, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Trent Williams, right? Like, we don't mention him enough because it's just like, oh, he's just amazing. He's he's just sort of a given, right? But like the defensive line, a lot of the guys on the defensive line that, like, by the way, like, they need to play better this week. Like, there's no one saying like they're not, right? But it's not. If you had to predict whether Nick Bosa and Armstead, Kinlaw, like all these guys, like Hargrave, thank you.
You got the bag, bro. You got the bag. Like, need you to show up.
And if we always talk about like professional player, like what's their greatest motivation? Embarrassment. If Chase Young wasn't embarrassed by like the clips that were going around on social media about his effort level in that last game, I don't even know like what to say about that, right? So like all of these guys, like the game, like this has to be sort of their best game. That's what I mean by like, what's my expectation about a team sort of giving their best here? Like, I know the Lions are going to give their best game. That's why I like Dan Campbell so much as a head coach, because he's one of like, I don't know, one guy in the league that like I trust will have his team. Like, obviously there's 2 or 3 or 4, but like that I trust will have his team like up and ready to go. I can't even do that with John Harbaugh at this point, right? Who's obviously a venerable, like longtime coach and has everybody's respect. Like, I'm sorry, man. Like I've seen too much of the playoffs of your team just not being like 100% like bought in, all in, and I don't love your game plan, right? Or at least with Dan Campbell, like I know I'm getting 100% effort, and like that's what is supposed to be the sort of quote unquote easy part about betting on the NFL. Is that you're supposed to know that you're getting everybody's best effort. This isn't a Friday in the NBA, a January in the NHL. This is like week 1, best effort. Week 10, best effort. Now, there's going to be some dips throughout the season. You can try to, predict those with spot plays and all of that kind of stuff. But like in the playoffs, it's supposed to be best effort, best game. And like, I say that having said, like, okay, I don't know that the 49ers played their best in those previous 2 games. Those are also kind of tricky games to get up for or to be at your best. It's hard to be at your best if you haven't played after 3 weeks. It's hard to be at your best against a Lions team who is going to like bite your kneecap.
They're going to punch you in the face to start the game. Yeah. Hell yeah.
And it's like, okay, man, 2 weeks, Super Bowl, everybody, level playing field. By the way, revenge, like you're not just back 4 years later, you're back against the same team. Like, bro, like this is the game. Like this is the game.
And
like,
you just
sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm just saying, like, you got the 2 weeks to kind of settle down, reset, be like, we got playmakers on our side, way more than they do on both sides of the ball. Like, if you just do your job, the Belichick thing, right? Like, you got the playmakers on the Niners, on offense, on defense, way more than the Chiefs do. And you have 2 weeks to kind of reset and be like, okay, we're here. This is it. This is the moment. And most importantly as well, why don't we look at this as the last 2 weeks preparing Brock Purdy for this? Like, if they're down to the Chiefs, are we supposed to believe that the Niners are just going to fold because they're down a touchdown at half? No, they're not going to care about that. They just did that 2 weeks ago straight, right? So like, I don't know. I just feel like there's so many things where you would look at the line and that's not the narrative of how this game's being talked about at all. And that's what's tripping me out here. That always sends my radar off in terms of, wait a second, what's really happening here with
and that
both
should
of
be
these
good.
teams?
That should be good for us, right? That's all, that should all, more often than not, since it's never gonna be 100%. We're just looking for it to be 55% in this case, because we're paying minus 121, minus 125. We're looking for it to be sort of 60% to be sort of theoretically profitable. If you understand what I mean there. But like, like that, that sort of dichotomy where it's like people are piling in on the Chiefs and keeping this number under 3, like that's the whole point, right? It's not that there is some sort of conspiracy that the 49ers have to win because a lot of people like the Chiefs. If a lot of people like the Chiefs and it didn't make any sense, like you couldn't make the argument for liking the Chiefs, then okay, that's one thing. That would be super weird.
Yeah.
I can make that. Like, I get,
of course,
I
totally get it.
I was like, yeah, of course it is.
Me of all people, I should just make a tape of me picking the Chiefs every single week this season.
Regardless whether they cover or not, right? It's like,
right? So I get it. I am that person.
You are that
I
dude,
understand.
yeah. And when it works 3 weeks in a row, the way that
Yeah.
it did in the playoffs, like you
Mhm.
forget that it didn't work in the regular season because they weren't necessarily. I don't even know what their ATS record.
I did not forget. I remember Christmas being like, did Patrick Mahomes just throw back-to-back pick sixes? Is that a thing that just or like back-to-back turnovers that the Raiders took house?
Sure.
Like, is that a thing that just
I
happened?
told you then, like I felt it was Christmas Day. I fell asleep. I woke up. I looked at the score. I was like, how long was I? Like my wife's sitting there watching the game. I was like, how long was I asleep for? It's like, I don't know, 10 minutes. It's like, what? And it's like, yeah, okay, that was a fluke. And like, I know we're referencing that being the most sort of obvious thing, but that wasn't a one-off game.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't a one-off situation where they haven't sort of played well.
And going back to using last year's playoffs, right? The way that we talked about the Philadelphia Eagles last year in terms of, yes, the Eagles made a run all the way to the Super Bowl, but when you look at how they made it, I think the process matters when now we're setting back to what's going to happen in this game. And obviously that game was like super highly contested, going back and forth all the way. Like I get all that, but I do think it mattered that, on one side, who was going to make the mistake? It wasn't Mahomes. It ended up being the one, like if Jalen Hurts could take back that one play, that changes so much of that game.
Yeah.
Right. Where he fumbles the ball. And it's just like, those are the margins, right? Those are the margins.
Totally. Yeah. And by the way, sort of just because you mentioned the Eagles and sort of going forward, right? Like the 49ers wins over the Packers and the Lions I'm willing to have you play this clip next season, like are way more impressive than either of the two wins that the Eagles had leading up to that Super Bowl last year.
Oh, I got those Eagles fans yesterday. I'm like, you do realize that Brock Purdy got hurt last year, right? They did not like that.
Yeah, like beating the Giants, right? Beating the Giants and then beating like a quarterbackless 49ers team is not the same thing leading up, right? So like we talked obviously with the Eagles kind of falling off this season, and like in retrospect, it's like, yeah, because the previous season had them overrated and they lost their two coordinators who have had success, or at least sort of, it looks like they may have success in their new locations. And it's like, yeah, okay, like that Eagles team is not the same, it does not have the same setup that this 49ers team had. And by the way, like that game was a 3-point game that came down to what some people think shouldn't have been a hold called, which I mean, it was an obvious hold. And obviously you mentioned like that fumble, right? So it's like, okay, man, like again, the Chiefs win that Super Bowl last year against a team that like nobody was really that excited about this following season. Whereas I think if the 49ers win this week, you're looking at 3 really quality wins. Like a year from now, you're looking back and going like, they beat the Packers, Lions, and Chiefs. And like, that matters. Like you're saying that going like, that's an impressive little run there when, a lot of times teams make the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl without having to really play that tough of a team because, you get the first overall seed and you get the bye week and you get the home games and all that kind of stuff, right? But like when we look back at this next year, I don't know where the 49ers are necessarily going to be next year. Maybe they're back in the Super Bowl, but we're going to look back and like, there's no chance we look back next year at the 49ers and be like, I don't know, kind of seemed fluky. Like, the Lions weren't anything. The Packers weren't anything. Like I think we're going to be like, man, the Packers and Lions are like fighting to the death here as double-digit win teams next season, fighting to the death for the division. And obviously, the Chiefs are the Chiefs. So
I'll say this, man, like, and just to wrap up like portion of talking about this game, because I want to throw at you some dumb props just to end on something fun here. But last week against the Lions, when the Niners were down at half, I'll fully admit I thought the game was over. Yeah. Right. Like, I'm not the person to give up. I'll like be like, no, there's still a chance, blah, blah. No. I thought the game was over. In saying that, going forward, I don't see a scenario in which I'm watching the Super Bowl and I'm like, this game is over. Because I've now watched 2 weeks in which the Niners have, should have, you could conceivably say you should have lost both of those games, but you found a way to win. And that's what good teams do. That's what talented teams do. That's what well-coached teams do. And now we're here going against a Chiefs team that we've talked about ad nauseum. Second half, they don't score points.
Yeah.
So that's just where I'll leave that in terms of the game and how this game will play out. Like, I'm just looking at this game and from every angle, I'm like, no, the Niners are right there. And that's not the way that it's being talked about. So let's roll.
Yeah. And fundamentally, right, like whether it's the Niners, whether it's honestly, it's the Chiefs the same way. what makes them great, or makes them potentially great, makes them potentially champions, is the frequency in which they win the game, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, if they win on the money line, it's not covering 7.5.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's cool
sure.
for betting, and like obviously the money line has to equate to the point spread and all of that sort of thing, right? Or like at least sort of, pretty close to. But again, we're not asking them to win by a margin here. So yeah.
No, I got you. So I got some silly props I want to throw at you for a second here. I got a Jason Kelce shirtless, meaning which will happen first. Okay. Minus 175, Jason Kelce is shirtless before or follow me.
Yeah.
He chugs or shotguns a beer, which is plus 125.
How are we grading these? This has to happen on TV?
You're being too. Yes, definitely.
Are these actual? Can you bet on these?
That's an interesting question, right? Because could they be rolling it back and then in real time, like, did he take his shirt off in the first quarter, but then later on in that quarter he's chugging a beer, but they showed the chugging the beer live, but they rolled back him taking. That's a great question. I don't know.
But two questions are like, is this a real bet? Did you is this a real bet off of a site, or did you make these odds up?
I did not make these odds up.
Okay, so it's a real bet you can make. Two, the TV, does it say like it has to be shown on TV, or do we have like a sleeper cell in like the Taylor Swift Kelce box? Like,
I think there could be a sleeper cell. I don't know. That's a great question.
Okay. I'll put it this way: whatever Jason Kelce betting you're going to do, I don't think the shirt's coming off. You see the videos and all the stuff before, during, after the Bills game, which was obviously when that all happened. That was, he wanted to get the full experience, right? And I don't know if it's an American thing, I don't know if it's a societal thing, but like, people are, for whatever reason, more likely to take their shirts off the colder that it gets. It doesn't make any sense.
It really doesn't.
You know what I mean? It's like, I got to prove something here. It's like, I don't know, maybe step out of the luxury box. No, he's not taking his shirt off. It's the Super Bowl. He's going to keep that tight. Is he going to pound beers? Yes, he is. So, like, I don't know why shirt off is first of all, it doesn't even make sense that shirt off would be the favorite, shirt off first, because as I understand it, beer drinking equals shirt off. So therefore, beer has to be, we're putting cart before the horse here if it's shirt off, right? So for a couple of different reasons: one, I don't think he's going to take the shirt off, and two, modern anthropology would state that he would be drinking the beers before taking the shirt off, would tell me that I think there's some good value on the plus price there of like chugs of beer, because I think that's just how he consumes them, to be completely honest with you.
A serious question. Super Bowl MVP? Do you have a?
Oh, yeah, we didn't even talk about Super Bowl MVP. Okay, Super Bowl MVP is actually really interesting. I'll try to be as quick as I possibly can. Patrick Mahomes is plus 130. The Chiefs are like plus 110. Right? That leaves not a ton of wiggle room between those two things, right? Because obviously at this point, I don't think we're going to get necessarily, what are the odds, I should say, that we get a guy losing the Super Bowl winning the MVP, right? Like, it just doesn't really happen in this modern era. Same thing with NBA Finals and Stanley Cup and Conn Smythe and all that kind of stuff. So basically, if it's 1-1, that means, you're paying 100% likelihood that if the Chiefs win, Mahomes wins MVP. At plus 130, I think I wrote, I have this in my article, my MVP article over at The Score, but I think it's like 89%, right? So you're telling me there's an 89% chance that Mahomes wins the MVP if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. You go, okay, yeah, like that makes a ton of sense. Problem is, like, historically, that's the quarterback only wins MVP, and I say only sort of in quotation marks, about 56% of the time, right? So you can say like, oh, quarterback always wins. Like, well, that's not actually true. Tom Brady doesn't have, what does he have? 7 Super Bowls? 8 Super Bowls? I've lost count. He doesn't have 7 or 8 or whatever it is MVPs, right? You've got a Julian Edelman in there. You got a Deion Branch in the mix, right? So even with, I think, 5 MVPs, that's obviously, certainly more than 56, but it's not 89%, right? So the point is like with Patrick Mahomes already having 2, there is sort of some wiggle room, at least from a voting perspective, that it's like, well, maybe we don't give it to Mahomes. Because by the way, 4 years ago, He wasn't the MVP for the Chiefs. Like, he wasn't the actual MVP. They gave him the MVP award. Damian Williams probably should have won the MVP that day. So, last year, obviously a little bit different. We had a 38-35 high scoring game, back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. So it made a little bit more sense. So the point is, he probably should be 1 for 2 on MVPs. And Tom Brady is 5 for 7 on MVPs. So if I'm looking for somebody other on the Chiefs, like, who would I look for? Oh, I don't know. One of the most recognizable humans on the planet all of a sudden, who had 10 catches in the first half in the AFC Championship game. So Travis Kelce is like kind of worth a bet. By the way, and when you're saying, okay, well, who cares if he's super recognizable? 20% of the vote is a fan vote for the MVP.
That's insane.
Right? 20%, which means 80% goes to 16 media members. So those 16 media members, each their opinion is worth 5%. The fans are worth 20%. So honestly, if there's a guy who could like somehow just jam the system here, catch 12 balls, even in a losing cause, and somehow win MVP, it might be Travis Kelce. But the point is, if he does that, as now the guy who is basically kind of the only sort of, I shouldn't say only, but like by far the most likely target for a high volume game for Patrick Mahomes, then okay, like he's sort of an obvious choice. So I think I have to have him on my card, even though I think the 49ers win. Now, of course, if I think the 49ers win, now we look at Brock Purdy, who is plus 220, who oddly enough, or maybe perfectly correctly, plus 220 with a team that's favored to win the Super Bowl by about minus 120, 125. I'll save you all the math here. That means he's probably about 56% likely to win the MVP if the 49ers win the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. That's exactly in keeping with historical sort of norms, right?
Interesting. Okay.
But I don't want to pay for the historical norm, especially when it's a guy who, kind of, polarizing as far as his value is necessarily concerned. Where do I want to go? I want to go to touchdown scorers and yard makers and big play guys. And as we know who that is. That's two different gentlemen here. One is Christian McCaffrey for obvious reasons, and the other one is your man's Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is as high as 30-1 to win MVP in this game. Christian McCaffrey, a more palatable, more understandable plus 450. You can put a unit on McCaffrey at plus 450, and then you can split a half unit, on Kelce, and half unit on Deebo at 30-1, and any one of those guys wins, you'll certainly come out profitable. But if the 49ers guys wins, either of those two guys wins, you win sort of 4 units on McCaffrey, and I think it comes out to 4 units as well on Samuel. So those are my 3 picks for the MVP. I'm going away from quarterback this year. Again, every year that we sort of get more analytical, get a little bit smarter, get a little less basic, we get more likely that a player other than the quarterback is going to win MVP. I think both offenses are good enough that we're not going to necessarily see a defensive MVP, though you never know. You might get that 2 interception game from somebody, whatever. It's just too hard to kind of catch that knife, and try to like hope you get Bosa. It's like there's so many. You mentioned obviously the mismatch in the interior. It's like, does that make an Eric Armstead? Or one of the defensive tackles, or literally anybody other than a defensive end, more likely. Fred Warner exists, right? Like there's so many other guys that in the defense where it's just like, if a defensive player wins MVP, you sort of go, okay, like too good, nice putt. If a quarterback wins MVP, you go, okay, like it just wasn't priced for me, like for me to be able to do it. And then, honestly, I think there's just 3 kind of really obvious choices outside of the out of that realm. And I'll have the Kittle stuff sort of covered by, I'm using him, a big game by him. I don't need him to win MVP. I just want him to get a ton of yards. If he happens to get MVP along the way, I'll tip my cap too. But I think that probably means that I win some of these other bets.
Exactly.
On George Kittle.
Yeah, I love Christian McCaffrey as Super Bowl MVP just because, wait a second, you're giving me the guy that basically scored a touchdown in every single game this year on the team that's favored.
It's like very Cooper Kuppy from 2 years ago, where guy gets Offensive Player of the Year earlier in the week at the NFL Awards, and then, obviously people sort of sit around and go like, obviously there was talk about Kupp being an MVP candidate that year. There's talk, obviously, throughout the season about McCaffrey being an MVP candidate this year. He's obviously like very likely to score a touchdown and somewhat likely to score 2 touchdowns. And like that might be enough, certainly with, 100 scrimmage yards to make him sort of the most likely guy. And if you went through, you check out my article, I'm not going to quote it all here. Check out my article on MVP, talks about, who sort of was the MVP for the 49ers through each one of their games,
Mm-hmm.
and how few of the times, if you just looked at the box score from a statistical standpoint, as good of a statistical season as Brock Purdy had, how often you probably would have taken somebody else to be MVP of that singular game.
Yep.
And a lot of the times it's Christian McCaffrey, which shouldn't really surprise anybody.
Definitely doesn't surprise me, and I love Christian McCaffrey as Super Bowl MVP. That's where I'm laying here. I'll get back to my bleepery Super Bowl props here for you. The Drake curse, probably the most famous gambler that exists for all the wrong reasons, like terrible sports gambler. But Drake curse. What team apparel will Drake wear on Super Bowl Sunday? And obviously we know the Drake curse has existed in the sense that Drake's wrong a lot.
Yeah.
But the line here is Chiefs minus 170, 49ers plus 130. I like the look on your face taking this like way more seriously than is meant to be here.
As everybody's listening and while watching might realize, Shell has not run these by me before. So as much as my anthropological study on Jason Kelce, might have sounded like I had that planned, I did not. And I'm really just buying myself time to try to think about Drake right now. Honestly, man, like you would know better as far as like lyrics. Like, does he have a Patrick Mahomes?
He does have a Patrick Mahomes lyric that came out after. No, follow me here, though. I'm pretty sure it came out after the Super Bowl Mahomes lost, because it was something like kind of poking fun at Patty Mahomes about to lose $500 million or something like that. Like he was poking fun at the fact that Mahomes just lost said Super Bowl, and I'm pretty sure that's because he bet on Mahomes in the Super Bowl and lost, if I'm not mistaken.
Is like a neither an option, or like I guess you get refunded if not? I don't think
if neither is not an option, but obviously if neither occurs, the house wins.
No, you get refunded if neither. Unless they offer you, I know that they have to refund that.
Okay.
I'm gonna go no. I'll put it this way.
He's aware of the curse.
He's aware of the curse, but also men at a certain age should probably just stop wearing jerseys. Let's start there, with other younger men's names on their back. And then sort of like keep the apparel to like a dull roar. And if like it has to be like a very specific situation, you have to really kind of line up with the team. Like, okay, if Drake's wearing like a Raptors thing, like, okay, cool, man. Like you've been with the Raptors since like, day one-ish, right? And it's like, you can't just show up as a Kentucky game wearing a jersey right now if you're Drake. Like, you're too old for that shit. So like, at this point, man, just like it's my same issue with Bieber, right? Bieber's out there with his pink jacket on, and it's just like, man, you're an adult. Now, I had to look up Bieber's age, and he's 29, and so I feel a little bit bad about going in on Bieber, because in your 20s, like, I'm still kind of letting you do whatever you want to do, but it's more just like, you don't have enough attention on you. Like, you have to wear the pink coat, and like, okay, like maybe the pink coat is like super expensive, but the way I look at it, I'm like, it's like a WWGC situation, right? Like, what would George Clooney do? Like, would George Clooney be wearing that? Like, George Clooney's got money. Like, he's got the villas in Tuscany. Like, he doesn't need, people are following George Clooney around when he's in town. Like, he's not wearing a pink, I don't even know what that coat was made out of, right? So like, it's the same thing with Drake. Just wear something super expensive. Clooney's wearing something super expensive. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to look like a jackass just because you're rich, right? So like, just don't look like a jackass. Just don't look like a guy who's trying to be 25. Just, wear a bunch of like super expensive stuff with like $1 billion watch on and sunglasses and stuff. Just you know what I mean? Just do your thing and just don't be a jackass.
Totally fair. Will any player or coach cry?
Don't I get to do a real one? I thought we get to get back and forth.
Yeah.
Real ones.
I feel like, hold on, crying emotionals. I think that's a no, I'm joking. Go ahead.
We get handicapping tear ducts. I want to get this out quick. As I said before, and I probably went longer than I intended. We mentioned obviously the George Kittle thing, right? From a yardage perspective, and like him being sort of this weird deep threat when it comes to like getting open. And I think the matchups really suit him. I think, listen, what other way are you going to put it, right? Like, this is a big Deebo Samuel game. You kept him healthy. You saw what it sort of looked like a little bit when he went out of that Packers game. This is it. This is the last game. He's obviously healthy. You caught 8 balls against the Lions, right? I don't know if you go back to the 54, Super Bowl 54 game plan and saw all the, the ways in which like he was successful in the running game. I got 2 props. I got over 4.5 receptions because I think they're going to get him the ball. Right. And I have over 16.5 rushing yards, right? I think they get him the ball in every way imaginable. Rushing yards over 16. It could be on one play, the way that he can get sort of loose on dudes. And 4.5 receptions, I think, you have to pay a little bit of juice for it. I think the lowest is available is -122. But anything kind of up to -150, because -150 suggests a 60% chance, right? Has to be 60% chance or better for that to be kind of a bet or a valuable bet for you. I think -150, obviously certainly not the best price, but that's the limit to where I would go with over 4.5 receptions on Deebo Samuel. It doesn't ask him to, other than obviously the rushing yards or whatever, but it doesn't ask him to have some massive game when it comes to like, he has to have 100 receiving yards or 80 something receiving yards. It's just an indicator that the 49ers are going to give him the ball. Again, you'll have to look it up. I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but basically every playoff game where he's healthy, he gets 12 or more touches.
Yeah.
So do the math, right? If it's 6-6, he's obviously gone over the receptions and he's probably going to go over 16.5 rushing yards there. And obviously scoring a touchdown, you can get him as high as almost +150. Anything +120 or better, I think he's a good bet to score a touchdown. Obviously McCaffrey, sucks up a lot of that probability when it comes to touchdowns. So you don't want to I don't like to get too loose with 49ers with sort of those mid-tier guys. Cause McCaffrey just might have 3 touchdowns. And by the way, if he has 3 touchdowns, he's going to win MVP, assuming they win. And we've got that sort of market cornered in that case. So Deebo is the only guy that I could see them sort of trusting in the red zone via handoff or tap pass type scenario. So those 3 plays on Deebo are what I'll give you before we start handicapping tier ducts here.
The other thing I'll say about Deebo too, to back up your point, is I think Deebo is good for at least 1 or 2 schemed Shanahan good plays. Right? Like the majority of it will be Deebo, has to break a tackle and he'll break 2 because that's just how he runs.
Sure.
But there'll be the one play that Shanahan will scheme him wide open for a crazy run where he's, the whole side of the field's open, or he's running free in the secondary, whatever it is. So I really like that one for sure, especially as you mentioned, he's their dude, big boy game. This is what you've been saving it for. Let's go. Will any player or coach cry during the national anthem? Both is yes and no are both -115.
Oh, I'm yes on this.
Oh,
isn't Chris Jones, isn't he already sort of historically having cried?
Interesting.
49ers a little tougher. I don't see any of those guys.
I think you're right about Chris Jones. Yeah, I remember seeing that. If this changes your opinion, though, got a reminder that Reba McEntire is singing the national anthem.
And it's supposed to be relatively quick. So let's handicap it this way, right? Last year, I think the total for the anthem was over 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And this year it's 90 something seconds. I think 93 seconds. I'd have to check that. Which means it's a 30-second difference. So people think Reba's going to be moving when it comes to this. Less time means less time for a shot of different players. You might not get to Chris Jones, right? Mm-hmm. You got to go coaches, you got to go quarterbacks, you got to go offensive players, right? If there's less time, that means it's less likely that you land on somebody who happens to be crying. So I realize that, my initial instinct was yes. And now when you start to break down a handicap a little bit, when you have 75% less time to catch a player crying, maybe no ends up being the right play.
Interesting. Okay. No. Oh, is that your real? No, that's not your real. Give me a real one.
No, you just gave me not a fake one, but a janky one. Okay, which one okay, let's go deep into the weeds here. Trent McDuffie, over 4.5 tackles.
Okay.
Chiefs cornerback, hasn't gone over 4.5 tackles so far in the postseason. Mm-hmm. I think this is why this is an underdog at +110. But he averaged 5 tackles this season. He was second on the Chiefs in tackles, which is kind of unusual for a cornerback, right? Like normally, obviously, tackles middle of the field, your linebackers, et cetera, et cetera. Chiefs having a handful of injuries to their linebackers will obviously depress that number. But not, I think he had literally 4 tackles in each of the previous 3 games. Maybe it was 2 of those 3 games. So he's close. But in the previous 3 games, the Dolphins, right, their offense was just absolutely garbage in the cold, right? So it's not like he had a ton of opportunities as a corner to be on the outside making tackles because the Dolphins are, getting a lot of pass completions. Tua wasn't able to get a ton of pass completions. Therefore, McDuffie didn't get a chance to tackle much. And much of the runs happened between the tackles. Speaking of runs between the tackles, a lot of Josh Allen, a lot of James Cook in the game against Buffalo. Not a ton of stuff happening on the outside with McDuffie, right? And when you think corner, you think, okay, well, they have to throw it to the guy that you're covering, and then you have to tackle. The Ravens, a lot of the stuff, obviously not a ton of running plays, first and foremost, but a lot of their stuff was like taking shots downfield and not completing those shots. So if you're not completing passes, you're not going to make a ton of tackles there as well. But what do the 49ers like to do? They like to use every corner of the field, right? They want to stretch you sideline to sideline in a way that the Ravens opted not to, and the Bills didn't need to because they were doing so well between the tackles. I think you're getting McCaffrey on swing passes. I think you're getting Debo on, like we mentioned, touch passes, end arounds, stuff like that. Even just McCaffrey on sweeps, right? A lot of scenarios where you're forcing the really good corners, McDuffie and Snead, to tackle. Honestly, I like both guys to have to make over 4.5 total tackles. But Snead, his line is minus 110. McDuffie's line is plus 110. Again, I think because he hasn't had to make many of the tackles so far. You're also getting better conditions than the Chiefs have played, right? We talked obviously about the Miami conditions, decent but still winter weather conditions in Buffalo and kind of scummy, rainy, damp stuff in Baltimore. This is peak, obviously Super Bowl best conditions you can possibly get. So you're going to get those passes completed to 49ers receivers, but you're also going to get runs to the outside. The corners have to come up, make tackles. McDuffie obviously showing that he's a willing tackler, averaging 5 tackles a game and being among the top tacklers on the Chiefs. Trent McDuffie over 4.5 tackles at anything with a plus in front of it.
Ooh, I like it. I like it. Very interesting. And I always find the tackles I like that one. Trying to find like just the right guy, to like.
Yeah, we won super easy. People like who are hardcore and are obviously, listen, I doubt anybody remembers this, but we had Reed from the Chiefs last year because we had, safety who is going to come up and have to tackle Jalen Hurts and any sort of like outside run plays last year. I think his number was like 4.5. He had that thing covered at halftime. We won that one super, super easy. Of course, the very next year, his number is a little bit higher. And of course, with Jalen Hurts, he's going to run a lot more in that game in the Super Bowl than Brock Purdy is necessarily. So that's why we want the corner instead of the safety. We want to have to deal with, the safety coming up. The safety's going to be probably playing back against the 49ers here, where we rather just have the guy on the outside who's a willing tackler. Second year guy out of Washington, I believe, McDuffie.
I got you. How many more do you want to get in?
Listen, man, I'll sit here all day and give you them. I'll put it this way. We'll get to this like now. Like everything that I'm going to give you here, like is available over at the Score. There will be 8, I think, total articles. I've done 4 of them. I've done 5. I've done game preview. I've done MVP. I've done passing, receiving, and rushing. We take this on Thursday morning, so I still have anytime touchdowns to do. I have defensive and special teams props, of which that McDuffie one will be included in there. Then we'll get into some deep cuts on Friday, along with some firsts. So, haven't even really looked into the firsts necessarily, so I won't be able to give you that. I'll give you.
So I say that to say I have one more that I really
you do one, and then I'll do one. Okay. You do one.
No. You do your one. I'll close.
You want to close? Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's do kind of a medium long shot. Not quite a George Kittle lead the game in receiving yards here. I'm going to say no successful field goal for the 49ers at plus 375.
Okay.
Fundamentally, mathematically, at least if you look at the regular season, the 49ers either didn't need a field goal or didn't get a field goal, depending on how you look at it. Either didn't, even attempt one, didn't need to attempt one, or the one that they attempt was missed. I think that happened in the last game of the season. 5 times out of 17. And you can, again, everything's over at the score. You can double check my math on this, but essentially that is, 5 out of 17 is what, 30 something percent. And this, at plus 375, let me get this part at least correct for everybody. That's 21%. So the expectation here at plus 375 is that this would only happen 21% of the time. Well, in the regular season, it happened about 30% of the time. So there's already kind of a built-in edge just kind of on. Sometimes you just don't need the field goal kicker because you're scoring touchdowns, right? It isn't even necessarily a slander on the 49ers by any stretch. Then you add the sort of context to it, which is like, you're a 49ers fan. How much are you into Moody coming onto the field like throughout this game, right? Probably not that psyched about it. The other 49ers fan friends that I have are not really thrilled with your guy Moody at this point. So listen, is he going to, try one from 40 yards? Is he going to make one for more than 40 yards? If they get closer than 40 yards, like, again, this comes down to like Shanahan, like, is he going to, turn over a new leaf here and be aggressive? Like, again, I'm hoping that at 4th and 2, he goes for it with this group where he didn't in the first, in Super Bowl 54. So, I think whether it's, the team, the faithful, the whomever, I think everybody's just kind of over the idea of like putting this on Moody. You get, factor in the new overtime rules where, again, a touchdown is that much more valuable. You're a little bit less likely to have to kind of eat a field goal in overtime or try a field goal.
I like it.
And again, this isn't some 50-50 type deal, right? This is a plus 375 where I think there's maybe like 5% of value from a mathematic perspective. And then there's maybe obviously a little bit of narrative to go along with it. So kind of just a fun one to end on there.
No, I like it for sure. I couldn't go through doing this seriously and also unseriously without having a Taylor Swift prop, the most basic Taylor Swift prop possible.
Can't believe it took us this long.
How many times will Taylor Swift be shown live throughout the game? Now,
whoa, okay.
Here's yes, right?
Yeah,
like,
how does
worded
live?
As live?
Yeah.
Right? So here's the thing, right? I feel like I don't think, and I'm reading this as it says live, but I just feel like it's shown during the game because live doesn't really make sense. What's live? You can't really quantify when something is like, we know when we're seeing a replay going to break, like we understand what the difference in that.
Yeah.
But like her just cheering,
yeah,
like coming back from commercial break, that's not going to be live. Do you know what I mean? Like you come back from commercial, you come back to start the third quarter, and it's like, they just cut to a booth. Like that's not live. Do you know what I mean? But we don't know that sitting at home. It appears as it's live. So I'm going to take this as Taylor Swift shown during the game.
So I'll put it this way. If you said live and live meant live, like I would literally say 1. Because I think there's one time where they establish that like, oh yeah, here's their box.
Totally.
Wait, what? Here's her luxury box. Don't do it. Here's her luxury box. Like this is where she's sitting, to establish that she's there. Every other shot, like this isn't a tennis match, right? Where it's like, let's, see the anticipation on her face and on break point, right? Like this isn't a tennis match where they're going to the player's box. I think everything else is reactive. And at that point, it becomes like, how good of a game do you think Travis Kelce has?
Exactly.
Right. And so
this is the
if you're betting the over, like you should probably just bet like over catches, over receiving yards, over touchdowns, right? Because like, let's put it this way. How many first downs do you think first downs or touchdowns do you think Travis Kelce gets?
I don't even think they're waiting for touchdowns or first downs. I think Travis Kelce catches. When he celebrates, they cut to her.
But I don't think he's celebrating like a 5-yard out on first and 10.
Fair.
You know what I mean?
But a 7-yard gain on first. No, joking.
I think it is a bang, and then there's a bang, right? Like it's like first. People who are not watching this, it's first down signal from Kelce, and that's almost like a director's cue, right? Where it's like he's signaling the first down. The director's like, "Okay, here we go," like off to Swift.
So
What's the number?
here,
I don't even
exactly. This is what I was gonna say. We were breaking this down, and it's perfect because the number that I've seen is 5.5.
Yeah, there you go.
Now I'll reference this by saying Travis Kelce's receptions is at 6.5. Just for some context, right? Just for some context. Here.
Again, I think, like I said, I think it's first downs and touchdowns, and one other time.
So there's going to be one where because it's on CBS. CBS just had the Grammys. She just won Grammys, introduced that she's coming out with an album. So I say there's going to be one time that they go to her for sure just to talk about the Grammys and do that promo. Hey Jim, did you watch the Grammys?
I don't know if it's Grammys centric. I think it's Tony Romo's a cheese ball centric, right? Like, because they know these guys have input, right? And like, who's going to have a tighter sort of deal on this? Like Aikman and Buck, right? Collinsworth and Tirico, or like Tony Romo, who like I don't even know if he's figured out who's playing yet. Right? Like I don't have much good to say about Tony Romo like in the booth anymore. He likes to do the joke, right? We're like, well, there's Travis Kelce's wife. Like it's like
I think he's done that like 8 times now.
Yeah, man. It's like now he gets to do it on like the biggest stage imaginable, right? Like exactly. So he's pumped to see the Swift stuff. And like Jim Nantz just came off of like Pebble Beach he lives, for people who don't know, he lives like on Pebble Beach on the golf course. They just had the Pro-Am this past week. And so like that dude loves a good celebrity, like, word that I was going to use earlier as far as patting on the back, a more graphic term than patting on the back. He loves patting some guys on the back. So yeah, I like honestly probably just take the over at this point with those two guys being super cool with like any shot of TS.
There's one thing that I messed up that I need to ask you about that we always talk about, and that's the first song performed by Usher.
Oh, okay.
Right? So like that's normally one of our go-tos, and I will critique myself and say that I failed us in not making sure that this was one of the first things that we discussed.
So I'm actually, listen, I'm always every year I'm like, I'm actually interested in this year. It's like you're interested in this every year. Okay, so I haven't mentioned the handicapping skills. Maybe there's quotation marks around that, of my wife, who we talked about before. Last year won her ATS pool by not listening to this podcast, I don't think. And this year hit 60% again and finished in second. When it comes to the playoffs and whatnot, this is her wheelhouse as far as handicapping is concerned. She said to me 3 weeks ago, she said, OMG, oh my God, had to be the first song based on sort of like the way that the song starts. And like, you're not going to bring out some of these other guests until later, like just from like a structural standpoint. And like, it's a good sort of lead up song. At the time she said this, or at the time, actually after she said this, when they opened these markets, which was, I think it was before the championship games.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I bet this in the airport, either on the way to Mexico. I did it on the way to Mexico. Yeah. So it's before the championship game. Anyway, so I'm like, okay, do people call it to say "Oh my God" or do they say "OMG" as when they talk about this title? Because I've never heard anybody.
Let's go with OMG. Sure.
They say OMG. Okay. So I bet OMG at like plus 650. I think.
Let's go. Which is great closing line value.
And that's my point. So I come back and I was looking at it today, and one of the books, I think Fan rhymes with Schmandul, has the first song off the board altogether. And so I'm like, Thursday morning, I'm like, oh my God, there's been a leak, like rehearsal, like blah, 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 blah. Like somebody knows now. And I went over to the other book that I traffic in that have these up. And they have My Way up at like minus 200.
I'm staring at a Schmet GMCM. I was trying to mix that up and it didn't work.
Nice.
But it has My Way at the favorite as minus 110. OMG, second favorite at plus 150.
Okay, yeah. And so my point is, like, when I came back from Mexico, I looked it up and it was like you said, it was down to like plus 140, 130. It wasn't necessarily the favorite, but it's like essentially the co-favorite with maybe like or Caught Up. I'm not really
My
sure.
Way.
No, but at the time it wasn't even my way.
Oh, it wasn't even My Way. Okay.
Wasn't even my way.
So
And
something's leaked for sure then.
So that's the thing. So today I look, and this other book that I'm not even going to do a fake rhyme on is minus 200. And I was like, no. And the other book and the Schmanduel like took it off.
Yeah.
And well, I keep using the rhyme. People don't know what I'm talking about. Took it down, and they only have Last Song and like some of the other like dumb props.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, so I tied those two things together. I'm like, oh no, but I don't want to like. Listen, we've all been sort of fooled on this stuff before, and you feel like a jackass if you're trying to like, I'm not going to lay minus 200 on something that we don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
Minus 110 certainly like a lot more interesting. Like
definitely,
for people out there, if you think, hey, one place has it minus 200, another place is taking it down, and it isn't the favorite that was the favorite early on, right? Like all of that stuff sort of
somebody knows something.
Sort of feels like, but again, like as much as somebody knows something, you get to, the show starts and, oh my God is on, right? So I'm sitting here with plus 650. Again, this is not some huge bet. It's $20 on plus 650. So I'm sitting there hoping to hear, oh my God, oh my OMG, as the first song. But I don't know, the writing kind of, and listen, by the time people listen to this, maybe there's a mega leak. Maybe everybody's taking it down. Who knows what the deal will be by the time people listen to this, but that's what I'm sitting on at a decent price, all because my wife just listening to the song, being a music connoisseur, was like, oh, this seems like the most likely one. And, for a long time, like you said, we were getting some closing line value and still might get some quote unquote closing line value. Who knows, but who knows what we actually get.
Yeah, no, I find it super interesting. And that's one where you pay attention to the line for sure, because that always ends up changing. Right. And I feel like that's one of the things that's so much fun. Like I remember being as rattled as I was betting on last year's Super Bowl on the Chiefs and the Chiefs being down. Rihanna coming out to Bitch Better Have My Money, and that being the first one, I was like, whoa, like stunned by this like shocking outcome of the Super Bowl. It's like so ridiculous.
I moved a line once on the first song. No, on Bruno Mars not wearing a hat in whatever year that was, like 10 years ago. I max bet it at Schmortz Schminteraction, and the line went from like plus 2 something to like minus whatever, like on that bet. And it's like the most I've ever moved a line. And it was Bruno Mars to because he had just gotten like a haircut. Like there's a deal about having it was like around the Grammys, right? And so it was like be like, oh, Bruno Mars has a haircut at the Grammys. And like the next week he's doing the Super Bowl. And it's like, he's not gonna wear a hat, no, with that fresh cut. And so your boy went in and just like hammered. And I was sitting there and I said this to like, I was go to a same Super Bowl party every year, which is a very sort of like not hardcore Super Bowl, group other than like maybe 3 or 4 of us. And that's probably even an exaggeration on the amount of people that interested in the Super Bowl. But I said to, one of the gals that's there every year, I said, hey, like I think my biggest bet, she's like, what did you bet on? I was like, well, I think my biggest bet was Bruno Mars to not wear a hat. So when he comes out without a hat on, like she bolts over. She's like, he's not wearing a hat. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Anyway, so yeah.
For strictly research purposes, going back and looking at Rihanna last year, like all the odds on Schmanduel heading into the Super Bowl last year was Don't Stop the Music at plus 150. Bitch Better Have My Money was plus 800.
That's what I mean, man.
Right? Right. It's
I imagine there was some like late closing of like minus something at minus, whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I just got, it's just scary because like you hear like, anthem leaks, right? Like, we've had that happen, and who knows? I don't know.
Interesting stuff. I know we just went 2 hours, but it's a Super Bowl. Big as a what? Right? It's a Super Bowl. So, hey, these things happen, and it's a lot of fun to break this down. It's been a whole lot of fun this whole entire season doing this with you, my friend.
Yeah, brother.
I'm losing count now how many years we've done this now in
4,
different iterations. This is the 4th year, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And it's been incredible every year, winning more money, which is obviously a great plus as well. Hopefully the people watching along can join in on that as well. Sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, no, I just want to hop in. I wasn't sure if you're going to say goodbyes there. I just want to hop. Well, first, obviously, if this is my last sort of mention.
Well, I wasn't going to end it without letting you.
I just want to. Okay. Well, I
would never do that. Well, all right, see you guys later.
We're at the 2-hour mark, man. Like things are getting loose here. We had the control room didn't even have the right game for the first 2 minutes. I don't know what's going on. No, I want to tell this quick story because that going back to Super Bowl 54. Is, and this is sort of a somewhat self-serving story, but that's the reason I sort of remember Super Bowl 54 as this like significant kind of thing was that was the subject of my first ever podcast over at The Window for like the super hardcore old school people, where I literally just at that point you have 2 weeks between this, Super Bowl or whatever, I was like, let's just get a microphone. Let's just flip the microphone on and talk about, because obviously it's the Super Bowl. We've just talked 2 hours about it. There's a lot to say. And so I'm like, let's just kind of start, now or never, right? Let's start the podcast with the Super Bowl. And so I turn the mic on. I talk just on my own for like an hour, right? And so the Super Bowl is obviously right before the pandemic. And so I started the podcast like, a month before the world shut down and like all sports left. So like maybe not like the best, not that I knew this, but like maybe, not the greatest timing for like, let's do like a daily sports podcast right before we stop sports for like 4-5 months, I forget however long. But it was like, oh yeah, March Madness is coming. It's like, oh no, it isn't. No, it isn't. Anyway, so I start doing that and I start doing the podcast and obviously, got through the pandemic and then we had the summer of like bubble sports and all of that sort of thing. And then like in towards the late, part of the summer, I get a message from Sheldon who, people who, I don't know if you're that new or whatever, but like Sheldon and I used to work together behind the scenes at Sportsnet. He's still at Sportsnet doing a great job on Raptors broadcasts, producing all kinds of good content there. Anyway, and, I hadn't talked to Shell for, maybe, a little bit around a year or so, whatever. And he messaged me out of the blue and he's like, hey, like heard you're doing, a sports betting podcast. Like I'd love to do like a weekly thing on the NFL starting this season. And at this point, right, like I am, again, we haven't had much in the way of sports. So it's not like we're like cooking here. We had a really nice run with hockey in the bubble. And so we had this really small, very small group of us that was making all kinds of money or whatever. But Shell, doesn't, just kind of knew that I was doing this. And I don't know if you even listened to any of them, but like, you're like, hey, let's do like a football one on a weekly basis. And so when you say like, what iteration that we're actually on here, right? The first iteration was on his, and then we sort of did, I think both of ours, like you would come on mine on Monday to talk about the games in the past. And then I'd come on yours on Thursday to talk about the game. I think that was year 2. Then year 3, we went over to a fledgling sports book that allowed us to, I should say that paid us to do a podcast, which was a treat. And then this is year 4. So anyway, so the 49ers Chiefs matchup, the point of this whole story is the 49ers Chiefs matchup in a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I kind of have like, as much as the world kind of came crashing to a halt, like very shortly after, and we had the weird Super Bowl, the Bucks Chiefs, I think it was the next year. I sort of have this like fond sort of career memory because that, turning the podcast on, doing that podcast, having Sheldon come in, sweep in and say like, hey man, like you want to do some stuff together, and like feeling somewhat validated that I was doing this because he was interested in talking, instead of me just turning the microphone on, he was interested in talking to me and with me about, sports betting and certainly obviously the NFL. Is that like, I look back on that game and go like, man, like my entire sort of restart of my career in the betting space, even though I bet for 20 years, even at that time, since I was, incredibly young, this matchup, Chiefs 49ers, even though it was 4 years ago, is sort of this reminder. Listen, to the Chiefs and 49ers played in the Super Bowl every 4 years. And I have this reminder of like the start of my, betting content, whatever, industry career. It's really kind of cool that, 4 years later, we're talking about the game together and the road that the last sort of 4 years of, our lives and of course for me, for my life, has kind of got here. So, I thank you and obviously thank everybody who's listening and has been listening from the 4 people who are listening way back when to the however many listen now.
The millions.
The millions and millions. Yeah, because honestly, like I say that sort of like humbly or whatever. And then the non-humbly part is like, I challenge anybody to find anybody who does a better job as far as getting winners out to the people than we do over at the Score. And that, we of course talk about on a regular basis here when Super Bowl rolls around and everybody's on, Radio Row, and like, especially in Vegas, where it's just like a sea of like takes and like, but it's also the same like 8 guys on all of like these shows. And you're like, are any of these guys even good? Is there any way to prove that any of these guys are good? Meanwhile, like, I'm one of the people, and like, it's not easy, but like, I'm one of the people who puts it in on, in black and white, right? Every week. Mm-hmm. And so you can go back and, we've talked about this before. You can go back and check my records, and the fact that Shell, is the one that I get to sit and talk to for 2 hours about this stuff, while all of these other, like, maybe they're good, maybe they're not, and like, it all just goes into the ether. Like, put it on paper. Like, that's what we do. And I know your record isn't necessarily as good as you would have liked this season, but listen, we talked about it before, right? A lot of those pushes were probably wins in sort of real life, and trying every single game, by the way, is like bleeping hard. And we talk about that on a regular basis. And I hope, listen, I'll put it this way, like, the people who listen to this show, I have a lot of respect for, because I think they're probably really smart, and they can really sort of understand kind of like what the context of the show is, mm-hmm. and what we do here. And like, and understand, like, I feel free to sort of talk about team ratings and stuff like that, and like the nature of betting as a market, mm-hmm. and while also, not giving the same BS that everybody else is. And so, again, we're cracked into the 2-hour mark here, but like, I think it's important with this is our last podcast, right? We're not going to rehash, next week. And, if Shell wants to talk about any sport, anytime, like, I'm willing to hop on, but this might be our last podcast till, August. Or sort of early September, depends what Shell wants to do. So it's all worth mentioning that, I have a lot of respect for the people who are listening, especially through the 2-hour mark. Because I think if you listen to this and like, you get it, like, you're hanging in, you're going to listen every week, because we only do one a week. It's not like we take up a ton of your time, this podcast notwithstanding. But you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, I could give it to you very quickly. Like, my job is to write little, 5-minute, readable articles. Like, that's just the nature of where I work and what we do. But we get to talk about this a lot more in depth. And I really enjoy every week that I get to talk to you, Shell. And I hope that sort of, comes out in in everybody's, eardrums every week. So thanks to you. Thanks to everybody out there.
No, for sure. And I appreciate you as well, my friend, coming on each and every week and breaking things down. And it sounds like catchphrases, information and education, but it's real life, and the reality of the situation is coming on and informing. I play the role of the audience, right? And I play the role of the audience in the sense that I am here asking questions. I'm the one that gets to ask the questions and, in real time, change my mind because I'm convinced based off of the information that is given.
And check me on when you're not convinced too, right?
Like,
sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm staying with my pick. And then I have to go and be like, okay, I need to do a better job in my convincing, and I can take that to my, day job.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know what I mean? So it works.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the people that rock with the show kind of understand the bit or the, the inside jokes of me coming in and betting on the Chiefs every week, or knowing if I'm like really on the Niners or I'm rolling with the Niners because they're my squad. And like, I will go over to the top to explain the difference, right? For sure. And like, tell you, hey, this Super Bowl, I'm on the Niners because I think they're going to win the game. Right. But I think by now people can read between the lines and they understand the record posting is to get people in when, the picks are going really well or doing really well. But I also would question the people who have made full season picks and how many people are posting when the picks are not above the win total, and like, there's a lot of people out there because there's a lot of people making picks and a lot of people you don't see their records, right?
Yeah.
So you got to ask yourself why that is. Yeah. So I appreciate the people that rock with us and they get it and they understand. And I get a lot of, I'm sure as you do as well, right? You get a lot of nice messages from people that roll with us and the people that understand. Yeah. And one of the things that I will say at the very beginning, and I do Raptors content. I do a lot of different podcasts. One of the things that I was hesitant about doing in the very beginning was because I was like, I don't want to deal with trolls. I don't want to deal with people telling me like this is right or wrong or you're dumb or whatever. And I feel like we've continued to build a community in which 99.9% of the time, that's just not the case. Everyone is dope. Everyone is responding, even when they disagree or they agree. It's a great community built of everybody locked in, everyone having a good time, everyone just enjoying this because it's sports. We're making money and it's fun. And where else would you rather be?
For sure,
for 2 hours, Super Bowl week, breaking things down. But I say all that while I also say I gotta run because the damn Raptors play. The Raptors made a trade. The trade deadline's in a couple hours. The Raptors traded for Kelly Olynyk for some reason. I don't know what's going on there, but my phone's blowing up beside me. I'm like, what are we doing right now? But I couldn't leave this pod without saying, first off, big shout to the people at Clutch Points for bringing us on board to do the pod this year. It's been a good opportunity to collab. And, at this point, I've enjoyed doing this pod and we will continue to do this pod. Just keep following us on the socials and you'll know where it will be each and every year because it's been so much fun and it's been such a good learning experience for me. And I hope, and I say this, and I think the mentions will collaborate this each and every year, getting better at making bets. And again, understanding the difference between the record and bets made for stuff, but also like understanding what's going on. And I think the learning curve and the learning experience has been like, I can't even quantify that. Like I'd have to sit down and go through the math, but I know just by, what the bank account says that definitely, it's been a positive experience doing this with you. And I appreciate you. And I thank you for the learning and the education on like the market value and the amount of people that I've been able to, and I know I'm going off on a rant and I don't really care because it's the last episode and it's been 2 hours, but the amount of people that like, for example, when you talk about sports gambling and they don't really know much about it, but then I'm able to, because of you, turn to them and be like, well, you got to first view it from like, each team has a market value. It's kind of like the stock market. And then once you get their brain like that, they're like, oh, really? Like, I didn't know that. They just think of degens like spending their rent money on like whatever, right? And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be like that. And that's what the education we try to provide on this show. And I'm happy to be able to do that and say that we provide that is something different than what the majority of the market is. It's deeper than just the pick of the Niners over the Chiefs. There's a why behind it. You get some football reasons for it, but you also get some math reasons for it, some market reasons for it. There's information provided. And that part is really important to me, along with the fun and the jokes and the Usher and Taylor Swift and all that other fun stuff. So my long-winded way of saying thank you, my dude, for joining us on the pod this year. We will continue to do so. And where can the people find you? Because I think I skipped over that part.
No, it's because I interrupted you. You mentioned our community, right? At mrusauthentic on Twitter. People go like, oh man, you must get so many like negative, like, idiots and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, honestly, like not really. Like it's kind of weird how few, and it shouldn't be weird because like, again, that, I much rather have sort of a smaller following that like has a brain than like a larger following that has a portion of them that doesn't. And so that's the community, right? Because like, contrary to popular belief, like you don't make any more money because you have like 100,000 Twitter followers or whatever, right?
True.
Like you're not getting a job in this industry. You're sure as hell not getting a job at the Score because you have like 100,000 followers, right? We're going to sort of skim the top and have the best, listeners and the best readers and the sharpest people. Because if you read my stuff and you don't understand it, like, I get it, man. You probably aren't going to come back. But like if you're you're inquisitive and you want to sort of learn, like you sort of mentioned the conversations that you're having with people, like people are going to come back, right? And they're going to enjoy betting a lot more. And like honestly, at the Score, like that's all we're trying to do is like have you enjoy betting more. And you mentioned like I always say like celebrating and commiserating, right? Like the honesty of these games, talking about these games and like evaluating it and saying like, okay, this is where we messed up, where we didn't, what I never saw coming and all of that sort of stuff. The honesty and all of that, I think people respect that, right? And so you give them honest, you give them funny, and you give them intellectual or like something that they can be intellectually curious about. I think you're not going to have a lot of people like call you an idiot because we're also not like ultra confident in a way that a lot of people talk about betting, where it's like, this is 100% of like cold lock or whatever. It's like, yeah, when you say that stuff, like you are inviting dumb people or honestly smart people to come in and be like, you're an idiot. Like, why would you be so sure about that? And like, and it's like, honestly, it's all just probabilities, man. Like when I say something, I'm like 60% sure of it. And if I'm right 60% of the time, guess what? There's going to be more money in your accounts at the end of the season than there was before the season. And I'm pretty damn sure if you listen to this podcast, or you read all my stuff, you have more money at the end of the season than you did at the start of the season. And like, that's pretty cool. And like, I'm really happy with that. And so anyway, everybody, listen, if you're listening to this, you probably already know, at MRoss Authentic on Twitter. It's where you can find me. At The Score, in the betting section, bet mode activated, all that stuff is where you can find our analysis. And, we're just going to keep on celebrating and commiserating in through the hockey playoffs. And, our guys do some good NBA stuff as well. And so, by the way, March Madness, maybe you've heard of it. Like that's going to be fun. And then of course, you know what, we're going to be back come August with all kinds of futures plays and, getting the season ready. That's going to come by way too quickly considering, how long it feels like it is away from today, but it's coming quicker. It's coming quicker than you think.
Yeah, for sure. Football season has been great. Another profitable year, which has been great on the pod and making the big bets and enjoying the big bets and heading into the big game. Enjoy responsibly. That's also the reminder at all times, because that's part of the learning and what we have learned while doing this pod as well, is figuring out that side of it, which I feel like is the most important side of it in terms of knowing what your units are, knowing. And like, once we did that and now we're digging, we're working, we're building. It's like when I think I've had like a bad couple weeks, it's like, oh yeah, no, I've been playing with winnings since like the first month of the season. Right. So like that's the beauty of it. That's what I mean. And that's what I'm happy in terms of building up the community and the people that understand what we're doing, instead of jumping in on 1 week or jumping in on the next week or jumping in at the Super Bowl. It's like, follow along, and long-term, as you said, it's math, it's probability. That's the beauty of it. So thank you, my friend. And as I always say, I used to pray for times like this, to rhyme like this. This is a Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast for the final time this year, because it's a Super Bowl. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, just stick to the socials. You'll be able to figure out where the next time is. But see ya.